Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto, the true founder of fairy tale. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by MangaFreak15 and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Prologue, Eternal Promise, Year X677. Mama? Papa? Where are you? A small girl slowly wandered through the thick maze of trees, clutching a stuffed pink horse to her chest. Her bare feet were covered in dirt and grass stains from how long she had been walking around, desperately searching for her parents. Sunlight streamed through the leaves above her head, falling in rippling patterns over the forest floor. There was a quiet rustle from a nearby bush. The little girl turned towards the shrubbery with a hopeful glance. Mama? Is that you? She asked, taking a step forward. A brown rope suddenly shot out from the bush, wrapping around the surprised girl and causing her to drop her stuffed horse to the ground. A weedy man with two buck teeth poking over his lower lip rose from the bush, cackling. Hiya haha. Got you, girlie. He leered, walking up to her. He rubbed his spidery hands together in glee. A little one like you will sell real well on the market, especially with that hair of yours. The girl shivered in fear as the man grabbed a fistful of her wavy blonde hair and held it to his nose for a long sniff. Who are you? What are you going to do with me? She stuttered, frozen to the spot. I don't like it when my prey talks back to me, the scary man hissed into her ear, scraping his dirty fingernails over her cheek. She whimpered. Stop it, she whispered, her vision going blurry from all the tears welling up in her eyes. Let go of me. The man snarled at her and smacked her, leaving thin red welts over her face. She cried out and thrashed against the rope that bound her arms to her sides. You brat! Don't make me hurt you more or you won't sell as well! He roared, tightening the rope. Mama! Papa! The little girl screamed. Someone, help me! The weedy man's face purpled in rage as the child he had caught refused to listen to his demands to obey him. You'll pay for this, you bit! He was interrupted as a flying kick nailed him in the head and smashed him into a nearby tree face first. He slumped to the ground, clearly unconscious as the whites of his eyes indicated. Without him to tighten the rope, the brown cord fell away from her small body. The little girl turned grateful, teary eyes up at her savior. She gasped as the sunlight hit his hair and face at just the right angle, making his tousled locks shine like spun gold, and the blue of his eyes glow like gems. He wore a dark cloak over his shoulders, outlined in burnt orange. Underneath he wore no shirt, leaving him bare-chested. Black drawstring pants with dark orange stripes running down the sides completed the get-up, along with plain navy blue sandals. Are you a fairy? She whispered, awed by his appearance. The stranger looked amused. That's the first time I've ever been called a fairy, he spoke, his deep voice rumbling pleasantly from his throat. She blushed in embarrassment, her hands clasping together in front of her. You aren't? She sounded a tad disappointed. The golden-haired man laughed. No, I'm afraid not, little lady, he said, grinning down at her. Ah, she pouted, absently toying at the dirt. Her green eyes landed on the stuffed horse still lying on the ground. Ah, my horse! The man bent over, taking the stuffed animal off the ground. He dusted it off carefully and handed it back to the little girl. She hugged the pink toy close, giving her savior a bright, cheerful smile. Thanks, mister! She exclaimed. What's your name? I'm Mavis Vermilion. Mavis, huh? A cute name for a cute girl, the man chuckled, patting her on the head. She blushed again at the display of affection. My name is Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. Mavis tilted her head at him in confusion. Uzumaki Naruto? But then wouldn't your name be Uzumaki? She asked. Where I come from, we introduce ourselves with our surname first, then our given name, the blue-eyed man explained, chuckling. Though that was a long time ago, I suppose. According to your land's rules, my name would be Naruto Uzumaki. Oh, that makes sense, Mavis replied, nodding. Okay, thank you for saving me, Naruto. No problem, little lady, Naruto responded, giving her a toothy grin. He turned his gaze to the unconscious slave trader lying several feet away. It's always a pleasure to put scumbags like him in their place. Now, why don't we get you back to your parents? I'll drop this guy off to be arrested afterwards. He walked up to the other man, swiped 2 fingers down the odd markings on his left arm, and caught a scroll that appeared in midair. He muttered something unintelligible to the girl's ears, causing a faint blue glow to appear over the unconscious man. The next moment the man disappeared, and then the scroll followed. How did you do that? Mavis gasped, staring at him with large, round eyes. Where did they go? Naruto winked at her, placing a finger against his own lips. That's a secret, little lady, he teased. Now let's go. I'm sure your parents are worried about you. Mavis was disappointed that he didn't tell her, but brightened at the mention of her parents. Okay. She took the hand he offered to her, reveling in the feeling of his large, strong fingers dwarfing hers. She giggled a little. This man would keep her safe, she was sure of it. It took a while, but they finally arrived at the small house where Mavis lived with her parents. The little girl let go of Naruto's hand and bounced up to the door, knocking on it eagerly. The door immediately swung open, revealing the face of her mother. The woman gasped at the sight of her lost daughter beaming up at her, and swept the little girl up in a crushing hug. "Thank Earthland you're all right, Mavis," the woman sobbed. "We didn't know what to do when you suddenly disappeared. Your father is still out there looking, but we can surprise him when he gets back." "Naruto helped me get back," Mavis chirped. "He knocked out the creepy man who caught me and brought me back here." "Naruto, is it?" The woman lifted her head and gave the area a cursory glance. "I don't see anyone here, honey." "Did he leave already?" Mavis turned around, confused. "He's right, huh?" she mumbled, staring at the spot where he had been just a few moments ago. "He was just here. I guess he's just shy," her mother remarked. "Now come in. Help me prepare for dinner, okay?" "Okay," Mavis replied. With a last look towards the line of trees beyond the house, she turned to enter her home, not knowing that it would be many years before she met the mysterious man again. Year X686. 9 years had passed since her first, and only encounter with the man named Uzumaki Naruto. Even though she had just been a child, her memory of him standing in that sunlight among the trees, his kind eyes and bright grin warming her heart, was still crystal clear. Since that day, so many things had happened: her parents' deaths, the Red Lizard Guild, the Tenra Jade. But now she was here, with the 3 people she had met while on Tenrajima, and together they had founded their very first guild, Fairy Tail. Do fairies have tails? She had asked her 3 guild members when they wondered why she wanted to name it Fairy Tail. No one knows. That's why it's a mystery. I want our guild to have an endless journey, like the eternal search for an answer to that question. An excellent question, indeed, Warad Sequin, a tall, dark-haired mage with a surprisingly long and blocky face, had said, rubbing his chin. "We may be a new guild now, but the path of greatness lies before us." Purhito Gaebolg, a mage with slick back hair and a black eye patch over his right eye, had said, "Let us endeavor to make Fairy Tail the best and strongest guild in all of Fiori." As with all new guilds, not very many requests came in at first. But the 4 main members of the guild persevered. This guild was one of Mavis' many dreams, and they wouldn't let it end when they had just reached the first leg of its journey. Then one day, they received a letter from an unknown sender. Mavis stared at it, noting the plain white envelope and the untidy scrawl across the front. It was personally addressed to her, although the sender hadn't bothered to write their own name on the envelope. She didn't want to open it in case it turned out to be a trap. "What's that, Mavis?" Warad asked, walking up to her. "A letter? Maybe it's a love letter," Yuri snickered. "It's never too early to get started." "It seems too plain to be a love letter, Yuri," Mavis softly commented. Her fingers turned the envelope over, and her eyes widened. On the back of the letter were written the letters U, and immediately knowing who the sender was, her slim fingers dug under the flap and tore the envelope open. She took out the piece of paper that was inside with care, a curious smile playing over her lips. Unfolding it, she began to read, drinking in his somewhat untidy handwriting and warm words. "Hello, Mavis. I know it's been years since we met, and I will understand if you don't remember who I am. Unfortunately, certain circumstances have forced me into hiding, and I can no longer freely give my name away. No, I'm not fugitive or a criminal, according to the shitheads on the Magic Council. Anyway, I've simply caught too much negative attention at the moment. If you wish to contact me, you must call me and I'll tell you how at the end of this letter. So how's it going, little lady? I heard you founded a magic guild. Congratulations on that, by the way. I have a gift for you, and it will also be a way to contact me in case of an emergency. With that in mind, please don't play with it. I won't be able to tell whether you're actually in danger or not if you do. Promise me, yeah? Emergencies only. Anyways, that's not what I wanted to write to you about. I have a proposition for you, and I hope you'll accept. To avoid giving too much sensitive information away, I will come and talk to you personally. This is the only time I'll allow you to use your gift outside of an emergency, alright? I can just see you vibrating with curiosity there. Have some patience, little lady. Being a guild master comes with lots of responsibilities. To accept your gift, place your thumb on that seal at the bottom right corner. It will react to your magical signature and give you the gift. The seal also functions as a sensor of sorts, and I've coded it so that you are the only one who can open it. Do you remember that disappearing act I did with the slave trader and the scroll 9 years ago? Same thing. Now you know my secret, heh? Well, what are you waiting for? Open that seal and get your gift. It might look weird, trust me, but throw it and you'll see what happens. See you soon, little lady. And Mavis didn't realize that she had a huge smile on her face until Purhito pointed it out. She blushed a bit, but told her fellow guild members that it was a letter from a man who had saved her life a long time ago. She placed her thumb against the small black seal in the corner as the letter instructed, and gasped as a shiny black knife with 3 prongs appeared in a puff of smoke. Her friends had been unprepared and all 3 jumped back with apprehensive looks, ready to unleash torrents of magic upon the item that had suddenly appeared in midair. No, it's okay, Mavis reassured them. He told me this was a gift for me. She set the letter down so she could examine the odd weapon. It was polished black, and made from a material that she didn't know about. The handle was tightly bound in white wrappings. There was a circular ring at the end of the handle that looked like it could fit 1 finger. The blade was split into 3 prongs, with the middle being the most prominent, while the other two were shorter and stuck slightly outward on both sides. There was something inscribed onto the metal just above the handle. Now that they knew what the strange item was meant to be, the other three slightly lowered their guards. After all, some gifts could turn out to be deadly. "May I see that, Mavis?" Purito asked. "It looks interesting." The blonde guild master handed the gift to him. Warad and Yuri also squished into Purito's space to examine the gift. It was unlike anything that the three of them had ever seen in their travels around Fiori. "Did this savior of yours tell you what this is supposed to be?" Warad asked, running a finger down the length of the blade. "If this is a throwing knife, this has got to be the first time I've seen one with 3 prongs. Mavis shook her head. "He only said it was a gift. He mentioned that this was something we could use to contact him in case of emergencies, but that was all. Maybe the name is considered sensitive information and he didn't want to mention it in the letter," she said. "So what does he want? Is there a reason he contacted you?" Yuri inquired, squinting at the inscription. "This is some damn fine forge work, if I do say so myself." "Ah, that's right." Mavis took the object back, ignoring Purito's grumpy "I wasn't done looking at it yet." She then tossed it point first towards the floor. The man from her memories was there before the knife hit the ground. "Jaya!" Warad yelled, falling backwards. Purito and Yuri already called up their magic and were about to attack the stranger in their midst when Mavis commanded, "Stop. This is him. This is the man who saved my life 9 years ago." The blond man held up his hands in the universal gesture of surrender. "I mean no harm, fairy tale," he said, looking at the 3 mages' apprehensive faces. "I simply wanted to talk to the little lady here. I'm glad you remember me, by the way." He smiled down at her. "While you're here, can I use your real name or do you still want me to call you En?" Mavis asked. "It would be best if you just called me En from now on, Mavis-chan," En replied. "I can't have my real name being heard by the wrong people, you know. I know you and your friends are trustworthy, but precautionary measures must be taken regardless." Mavis nodded. "Okay, En. Let's go up to my office. We can talk there," she said, gesturing to the stairwell leading to the 2nd floor. "You better not hurt her," En, Yuri warned. "Mavis is the only one who trusts you. I'll bring you down myself if you harm one hair on her head." "Fear not, the little lady is too cute for me to harbor ill will towards her," and chuckled. "Lead the way, Mavis-chan." The petite girl danced up the stairs, and following her at a more sedate pace. When the door closed behind them, and slapped a palm against the door, a black mark appearing on the door from underneath his hand. "What's that for?" Mavis asked curiously, sitting in her chair. "Your friends might try to eavesdrop on us. This nifty little thing makes our conversation entirely private," and said cheerfully. He stood opposite her at the other side of the desk, dropping his grin in favor of a more serious face. Mavis recognized that now was not the time for fun and games, so she also adopted a business face. And almost laughed because her serious face was completely unsuited for her, but held back. "So, I have a proposition for you, Mavis-chan." "Yes, you mentioned so in your letter," said Mavis. "Before I tell you about it, let me give you some background information about myself," said En, crossing his arms across his chest. "I come from a place called the Elemental Nations, which is what you guys now call the Orient." "The Lost Lands of the Orient?" Mavis gasped. "I heard that place is supposedly a myth because no one can find it." "You came from there, En?" En nodded, some strands of blonde hair falling his eyes. He swept them aside with his hand. "The Elemental Nations existed a long time ago. As time passed, modern technology and foreign magic, the kind you mages use, came into favor and the people of that land, called shinobi, fell out of favor. War and emigration left it in ruins. There's nothing there anymore but the last remnants of its culture. I am the last shinobi left," he explained. Mavis frowned, lightly biting her bottom lip. "But if you came from there, how old are you, En?" she asked tentatively. "You don't look a day over 25. "Older than you think, Mavis-chan," En replied, winking. "You're welcome to try and guess if you like. You're not going to be able to guess how old I am." "Ooh, that was a challenge, wasn't it?" Mavis said, shooting up from her chair with a grin on her face. "If I can guess your age, do I get anything?" En pretended to mull things over. "Nope," he answered. "Actually, what would you want anyway?" Mavis pointed at him. "If I win, you'll join my guild," she declared, and blinked at her, surprised. "Join your guild? You want an old fart like me in your guild?" he teased. Mavis pouted at him. "What, you won't accept it?" she asked sulkily, and just laughed. "Oh, I will. It's on, Mavis-chan," he said. So, back to the story. Shinobi is a term used for the warriors of the Elemental Nations. We were ninja, so to speak. There was an energy called chakra that existed in a shinobi's body. As an individual grew, so did their chakra coil. This is different from what mages use. Mages' bodies are wired to automatically collect ether nanoparticles from the air to refill their magic containers. With me so far? Sure, Mavis answered glibly. She gave a slightly guilty smile. He just sighed and continued with his impromptu history lesson. Chakra enables me to perform many feats, and is much more versatile than magic. Most mages tend to stick with one type of magic, but chakra makes me more of a jack-of-all-trades type. Which leads to my proposition. Mavis Vermilion, I, Uzumaki Naruto of the Elemental Nations, hereby request to become Fairy Tail's official Shadow Guardian, Naruto finished, bowing deeply to the guild master. Mavis stared at him in stunned silence. She slowly sat back down on her chair. You're sure about this, En? She asked softly. You won't be able to reveal your name or face to anyone but the guild masters of Fairy Tail. You will forever be a shadow of the guild, its eternal protector no matter what happens to it. Shinobi were born to be shadows, Mavis-chan, and answered steadily, raising himself up again. And I have lived for this long thus far, more years aren't going to hurt me. I have decided on this myself. Why? Mavis murmured. We are just a brand new guild. Why protect us? And regarded her with cool blue eyes. I can see the potential in your future, he replied quietly. Your kindness and caring for your comrades, they will be passed down to all of your guild members. I wish to protect this guild so that it will grow into something that you can be indefinitely proud of. Maybe some years down the road I'll have to abandon my shadow guardianship and step into the light, but until then, I will be its invisible guide and protector. Mavis smiled sadly. Very well then. I, Mavis Vermilion, hereby accept Uzumaki Naruto's request for shadow guardianship of Fairy Tail. The shadow guardian cannot betray the guild or its master in any way. This contract shall bind the guardian to the guild for an eternity, unless the current guild master chooses to relinquish said guardian from the contract. So mote it be. Golden magic circles burst into existence, a fiery ribbon of platinum magic circling around both of them, binding them to the contract. The image of a black fox with 9 tails appeared on Mavis' right wrist, while Naruto received a black fairy tail mark directly over his heart. He looked down and put one hand on the mark. I guess you'll have to find something else you want if you win, Mavis-chan, he joked. With this mark, technically I am part of your guild. Mavis laughed with him, her musical voice tinkling like tiny bells. Yeah, you're right. Let's see if I win. Will you take me out for dinner? She asked, and blinked. Like, a date dinner or just as friends? A date dinner, of course. Mavis cheered. I am a lady, you know, a little lady that is, and teased, causing the young guild master to puff out her cheeks in annoyance. The golden circles faded from the room. Well then, little lady, I shall see you later. As Fairy Tail's new shadow guardian, I will always be here with you, and said, giving her a salute. Ta-ta for now. He vanished in a puff of smoke. You're X703. Are you passing down the title now, Mavis-chan? And asked, standing in front of Mavis' desk. Your tenure as guild master has lasted 17 years so far. Mavis, now a 30-year-old woman, smiled at him wanly. 17 years is long enough for me, and, she said gently. It's time for me to step down so my successor can lead Fairy Tail to a new age. Who is it? You'll have to pass on responsibility for the Shadow Guardian contract to them. I'm thinking of letting Purito take over for me. What do you think? Mavis asked, and raised an eyebrow. You want my opinion on this? Mavis nodded. Purito certainly has a good head on his shoulders. He values his comrades and isn't lacking in the magical department either. As long as he carries your will, Fairy Tail won't falter under his leadership. I'd say he makes a good choice. Remember that you'll have to show him that too. The Lumen Histoire? Yes, I know, Mavis sighed. Thank you for all you've done for Fairy Tail, and I don't know where we would be without you. Ah, shucks, little lady, don't downplay yourself. Even without me here, your legendary tactical prowess would have kept the guild afloat, no problem, and said, grinning. I was simply following the melody of the fairies, Mavis sniffed, although the smile threatening to break out of her face indicated that she wasn't serious. Sure, and agreed. Do you still think I'm a fairy? He gave her a cheeky grin. Wah, of course not. She denied. You said so yourself that you weren't. Damn straight I'm not, he said. But if you want to get technical, then yes, I am a fairy of Fairy Tail, that is, Mavis huffed. You're poking fun at me, aren't you? She grumbled. When haven't I poked fun at you in some way, little lady? Oh, I'm not little anymore, and I'm 30, she exclaimed. And you still look like you're 16, okay? He replied. I'm pretty sure girls like to look younger than they actually are. Mavis didn't miss his brief mumble of like Tsunade-ba-chan. That's not the point, she insisted. The point is that you still treat me like I'm, and gave her a somber look. When you're as old as I am, everyone seems like little kids, he said quietly. And it has been a very long time. Mavis didn't have a counterargument to that. Do you ever get tired of living, En? She asked equally quietly. Your friends and family have probably been waiting for you for years, and barked out a laugh. And don't I know it? He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. But I've been cursed with this immortal existence. I can't die. I'm not even sure there is a way for me to die. Old age? PSH, no way. Fatal injury? No problem, it'll heal in an hour. Poison? Gone in minutes. Decapitation? Well, I haven't tried that and I really don't want to. It sounds messy, En? My next guess is 450 years old. Sorry, try again. Mavis stamped her foot on the floor like a kid. Darn. I thought I'd get it right this time. She pouted, and laughed. At this rate, you'll grow old and wrinkled before you guess my age right, he teased. Old and wrinkly or not, you'll still have to take me out for dinner, Mavis said. I'm determined to get this right. See this? This is my determined face. I'm so scared, Anne replied jokingly, and Mavis whined. You tease, Mavis huffed, but walked around the room to the door. She made her way downstairs, spotting her target sitting at one of the tables talking to one of the newer members. Purito! She called, gaining everyone's attention. Come to my office, I need to talk to you about something. Purito excused himself from his conversation with the rookie member, and followed Mavis back to her office. Once the door closed and the privacy seal activated, Mavis gestured for Anne to come out. Purito stared at the third person in the office. The person was very tall and broad-shouldered, only slightly shorter than himself. The person wore a black mask decorated with orange lines, giving off the visage of a snarling fox. A black cloak with burnt orange trimmings covered the person's shoulders, and the person wore nothing underneath but a pair of black cargo pants with orange flames rising up from the bottom. The person's arms were covered with thin steel plates, their hands sporting a pair of plain black fingerless gloves each embroidered with the guild's insignia in dark orange. A black fairy tale mark was placed directly over their heart. Midnight blue combat boots completed the rather dark ensemble. Who are you? Purito finally asked. You don't remember me? I'm hurt, a distinctly male voice drawled from behind the mask. Purito's brow furrowed in confusion. Should I? Remove your mask and perhaps I'll remember who you are, he said. Ah, but I wear this mask for a reason, you see. Mavis-chan, do your thing first. Purito's senses instantly went on alert. This strange man was on such familiar terms with Fairy Tail's guild master, yet chose to hide behind a mask? For some reason, his term of endearment towards the petite blonde woman seemed strangely familiar. Mavis took a deep breath. Purito, you have been with this guild for 17 years. You have seen it rise, struggle out of the earth, fall to frustration, and live. Your mind is keener than any blade, and your magical power is nearly unparalleled. I have discussed with Anne here, and both of us have decided to choose you as the next guild master of Fairy Tail, she said firmly. Purito had been expecting many things, but certainly not this. You want me to be the next guild master? He said, shocked. But this is the highest honor you could bestow on me, Mavis. Thank you very much for your consideration. He bowed deeply to the blonde woman. Mavis smiled. Chin up, Purito, she said softly. Your love for your comrades is clear, as is your heart and mind. I gladly welcome you as the second guild master of Fairy Tail. I wholeheartedly accept the position and all the responsibilities that come with it, Purito said. I will make Fairy Tail a guild to be proud of, Mavis. I know you will, old friend, Mavis laughed gently. But before I hand over the mantle of guild master, there are a couple things you must first know about. And if you would please take off your mask? Time for me to shine, little lady, Anne said, undoing the strap that held the mask to his face. He looked up when it was off and gazed directly at Purito's surprised face. So it's you, the mage answered in a slightly gravelly tone. No wonder I recognized your voice from somewhere. You are Anne, the man who saved Mavis many years ago, correct, Anne said. And since you are going to be the guild master, you should know that I am officially contracted as Fairy Tail's shadow guardian. Purito almost choked on his own spit at the casual revelation. A shadow guardian? I didn't think anyone still did that in this day and age, he murmured. All for the purpose of protecting Fairy Tail, Anne said firmly. Mavis-chan will pass her part of the contract to you, the new guild master, and from then on it will be your responsibility to ensure that my tri-pronged kunai is put to good use. Like I've told Mavis-chan, it is not for playing with. Use it only for emergencies. Rest assured that I will not play around with a weapon like that, Purito replied. He turned back to Mavis. What else do you need to tell me before you announce me as the new guild master? Come with me. What I am going to show you is a secret that absolutely must not be revealed to anyone except who you choose as your successor. Mavis gave him one of the most serious looks he had ever seen on her face. Do you understand, Purito? Yes, I understand, he said. I promise that this secret shall never leave my lips until I choose a successor to pass it on to. Mavis smiled. Good. And you are dismissed. Let's talk again soon, she said to the blonde man. And gave a slight bow, slipped his mask back on, and disappeared into the shadows once more. Year X750. Mavis lay on her deathbed, staring silently up at the blank white ceiling. Though she was old and her body was failing her, she still sensed En's presence as he appeared in the room. She attempted to lift her head to see him, but quickly tired and abandoned the endeavor. En crossed the room in 3 quick strides and stood by her bedside. You're about to go, huh? I'll miss teasing you, little lady, he said quietly, brushing her graying hair out of her face. Her cracked lips parted in a semblance of a smile. En? My last guess is 900 years old. She took a wheezing breath as she waited for his answer. He got it in one, princess, and answered, finally giving her the confirmation that she had been waiting for so long. I told you I'd get it, didn't I? She rasped, trying to muster the strength to grab his hand. He saw what she was trying to do and took her hand. I'm sorry I can't take you out for dinner though, he murmured. Maybe next time, okay? Promise? I promise, Mavis. And Uzumaki Naruto never makes promises he can't keep. Thank you. She took a deep breath, silently praying for her body to hold on just a little bit longer. And no, Naruto? Yeah? What's up, little lady? I love you, and smiled sadly down at her feeble form. I know. I'm sorry I couldn't be around longer, she whispered. You lived a long and happy life, Mavis. That's enough for me, he replied, squeezing her hand gently so he didn't accidentally crush her brittle bones. Bury me on Tenrajima, please? Mavis asked, taking a rattling breath. If that's what you want, little lady, and replied. Your wish is my command. Mavis let out a rasping laugh, her eyes blinking tiredly at him. I feel tired, Naruto. Can I sleep now? She asked, and leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. Yeah, you can. Good night, Mavis. Fairy Tail is in good hands, he murmured. Okay, she said, smiling at him. Her eyes closed, and seconds later, her breath ceased and her heart stopped. Mavis Vermilion, first guild master of Fairy Tail, died at the age of 77, holding the hand of her most beloved person, and let out a slow breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. See you next time, little lady, he whispered into the air. He imagined he could still hear her tinkling laugh in the room. Chapter 1. Little Dragon, Big World, Year X736, Makarov. The blond man looked up as the tall, elderly figure of Fairy Tail's second guild master loomed over him, his staff firmly grasped in one hand. Yeah? You want something, master? Purito, who had grown a fine white beard and mustache during his years as Fairy Tail's guild master, nodded. Come with me, boy. There is someone I would like to introduce to you, he said, turning to head to the upstairs office. Purito chuckled quietly, but said nothing. They entered the office, and the guild master closed the door behind them. He looked at Makarov for a few moments, then turned his head to the left and spoke to thin air. You can come out now, and Makarov jumped back in surprise as a man materialized out of the shadows of the room. Good afternoon, Purito-san. You called? Asked the strange man. Who is this? Makarov demanded, glaring at the newcomer. I've never seen him before. Both Purito and En laughed. He reminds me of Yuri, said En, stepping closer to the shorter man. Man, that rude way of speech. Like father, like son, I say. Indeed. Makarov, I would like to introduce you to En, Fairy Tail's official shadow guardian, Purito said, gesturing to the masked man with his staff. En bowed, one hand poised over the black Fairy Tail emblem on his chest. Pleasure to meet your acquaintance, Makarov-san, said En softly. I hope we can have a splendid relationship. Makarov eyed En warily. A shadow guardian, you say? I'd heard they existed, but I never would have imagined that my own guild would have one, he said. You say your name is En. Can you tell me your true name? En shook his head. My true name must remain a secret. I have enemies far stronger than this guild who are after my head, you see. To you, I will simply be En, he explained. Makarov nodded. Then a thought struck him, and he turned a suspicious glance towards Purito, who was trying and failing to hide a smirk. Master, don't tell me you, he began. I knew I made the right choice, boy. You caught on quickly, Purito cut him off, giving the 40-year-old man a grin. Makarov felt a chill run down his spine at the sight. Yes, it is exactly what you are thinking. I am appointing you as the third guild master of Fairy Tail. You can't be serious, Makarov deadpanned, giving the elderly man a flat glare. I'm not suited for the position. There's got to be someone else in the guild who's better at this. You should have more faith in yourself, Makarov-san, said En, stepping to Makarov's side and laying a steady hand on his shoulder. Makarov had to resist the urge to throw En's hand off and punch him in the face for touching him. The masked man seemed to get the hint though, and backed away with a murmured apology. I couldn't be more serious, boy, said Purito, thumping the end of his staff against the wooden floor. You hold great love for your comrades, an absolute requirement to be guild master of Fairy Tail. Your large magical capacity and successful mission record are both higher than the others in this guild. You are my final choice, boy. I will be departing on my own journey soon and I have something I need to show you before then, but I know you will lead Fairy Tail to greatness. But master, Makarov protested, I have faith that you can believe, Makarov. This guild doesn't need an old fossil like me as its leader. It's your turn now. With a fresh mind in charge, Fairy Tail will become number one, said Purito firmly, tapping the head of his staff gently against Makarov's head. Believe, boy. That's all you need to do. Yes, master, Makarov acquiesced, closing his eyes. I'll try. Aye, that's a good lad, chuckled Purito. No need to be so serious though. Lighten up, your journey has just begun. Purito-san, if you'll allow me to finalize my part now, En said, grabbing their attention. One of his hands was poised to take off his mask and reveal his face. The aging man nodded. Go ahead, En. Makarov watched as the man took off his black mask, revealing a surprisingly handsome face with eyes bluer than the sea. An untidy mop of golden blonde hair sat on the man's head, long enough to fall over his eyes. 3 whisker marks graced each cheek, giving the man a more rugged, almost animalistic look, but it suited him. En smiled. Because you are the succeeding guild master, Purito will pass the responsibility of maintaining my shadow guardianship contract to you, he said. He held up the triple-pronged knife that Makarov had glimpsed a few times during his trips to the master's office. This is the tri-pronged kunai I gifted to the first guild master, Mavis. When you throw it, I will automatically appear wherever it is in a split second. As per my own self-made tradition, I advise you not to play with it because I cannot tell the difference between when it is thrown for amusement, or when it is thrown in the case of an actual emergency. This is for emergencies only. Alright, Makarov slowly nodded. He walked forward to accept the strange knife from En, critically examining it from base to tip. This is the strangest knife I've ever seen. What did you call it again? He asked, turning his gaze back to the patiently waiting man. It is a kunai, replied En. This kind in particular is a weapon from my homeland that was created for my father's signature teleportation technique. I mastered the skill many years ago. Without saying anything, Makarov threw it towards the opposite wall as quickly as he could. And instantly appeared in the kunai's trajectory and caught it by the ring at the end of its handle. He twirled it around his finger effortlessly, giving the 40-year-old man a humorous grin. Was that really necessary, Makarov-san? Makarov straightened with a grin of his own. I see your skills are exactly as you claim, and thank you for protecting Fairy Tail for all these years, he said, bowing. Sure, no problem, said En, lazily waving a hand about. He handed the kunai back to Purito, who stored it in one of the desk's drawers. This guild has been growing on me ever since I took up Shadow Guardianship. I hope you will continue to protect this guild and its future for as long as I am guild master, said Makarov, holding out a hand, and took it, and the men shook hands. I will protect this guild for as long as it exists, Makarov-san. I am its shadow and guardian, after all, En replied. In fact, it is more than likely that I will continue to protect it even after you are long gone. Makarov released his hand and took a step back. Mind elaborating on that? He asked, referring to En's last statement. If you swear on your life that what I am about to say will not leave this room, said En. The friendly grin disappeared from the man's face, replaced by a face that could have been carved from stone. It took all of Makarov's willpower not to visibly flinch as the atmosphere in the office suddenly turned oppressive and suffocating from the sheer power of En's presence. Even Purito looked slightly unnerved. With great difficulty, Makarov took a deep breath and straightened. I, Makarov Dreyer, hereby swear that I will listen to En's words without the intention to betray him, whether it be to an outside party or a close acquaintance. Should I speak of the matter outside of my boundaries, I shall willingly forfeit my life in exchange, he said, loudly and clearly. The choking presence disappeared as soon as he finished. En gave him a sunny grin once again, and Makarov felt so relieved that he nearly collapsed. You're terrifying, Makarov declared, once he got his breath back, and smiled enigmatically. Am I really? He purred. All part of the job description, I assure you. Now, on to the main matter. The truth is, Makarov-san, I am not human. I am immortal. Makarov's brow furrowed in confusion. Immortal? He repeated. How so? Let's see, it's the year X736 according to the Earthland calendar. That means I am roughly 886 years old at this point in time, and said, absently counting on his fingers. Math was never my strongest point. Oh, and don't tell Mavis. She's still trying to guess how old I am. Why make her guess when you told me up front? Makarov asked, crossing his arms. It's more fun this way, the taller blonde said, smirking. He closed his eyes. When I say I'm immortal, I mean it, Makarov-san. 8 centuries is a long time to be alive. It is, Makarov agreed. Forgive me, but I am still a bit skeptical. If you are truly as old as you say, how have you kept yourself sane for all these years? En's smile turned sad and wistful. I don't know, he quietly confessed, opening his eyes. I should have died a long time ago, but I didn't. How do you think it feels to live continuously while everyone else perishes around you? How do you think I feel knowing that I can't form permanent attachments to anyone, knowing that I'll just be left alone in the end? Bonds are naught but leaves in the wind to me. It has been a long journey and I haven't given up yet, but it does get monotonous sometimes. I'm tired, Makarov-san, yet I'm still trying to find a reason to live. I have been searching for so long and I just want to give up and rest, but that's not how I roll. I can't give up and let the world move forward of its own accord. If there's a reason for me to be here, I will find it. If there's a way for me to die, I will take it. Otherwise, what's the point? I've watched years come and go, people live and die, and the world tilt on its head more times than I can count, but I'm still here. The sheer amount of bitterness reflected in En's voice startled both Makarov and Purito. And Purito murmured softly, reaching out to touch the man's shoulder. En shook his head and stepped back. He slid the mask back over his face so that the other 2 men wouldn't be able to read him. He bowed briefly to them as he melted back into the shadows of the room. I've said too much? I'll be going now. The next time I'm called, I expect to see you sitting behind the desk, Makarov-san. The shadows warped, and then he vanished. Makarov turned back to his master. He's crazy, but he's the good kind of crazy, don't you think? Purito said. Really, it's admirable that he can still retain that never-give-up mindset despite being immortal. A lesser man would have broken a long time ago. Now come. I need to show you something important. You're X777, Igneal. Igneal! Where are you? Panted a small boy with rose-pink hair as he ran around the forest where he lived, attempting to locate his draconian caretaker. Hey, come out! This isn't funny anymore. The scaled scarf wrapped around his neck flapped behind him. It snagged on a low-hanging tree branch and the boy was forced to stop and untangle it before it ripped. Then he took off towards the clearing where Igneal usually napped when he wasn't teaching him the human alphabet or playing with him. Igneal! The boy shouted when he burst into the clearing. The tiny seed of hope that sprouted in his heart died as he looked around the empty clearing in despair. Clear tears began to slide down his cheeks, and he buried his face into the scarf to try and muffle his sobs. He fell on his knees and bawled loudly, Igneal! Where are you? Come back, don't leave me alone. No one answered him. Igneal had well and truly disappeared, leaving him behind. The boy looked up at the sky and screamed. Hours later, the ground had been torn asunder and scorched blacker than charcoal from the boy's furious rampage. Exhausted, he laid on his back and muttered, Igneal, come back, you have to come back. You can't just leave me here like this, damn it. He slapped a dirty hand over his eyes, but the tears kept trickling out. Damn it, Igneal, come back, please. The boy's name is Natsu Drangneal, a child raised by the fire dragon Igneal and taught how to use the lost art of dragon slayer magic. And on July 7th, year X777, Igneal abandoned him. Natsu uncovered his eyes, the tear tracks making his face feel sticky and gross. I need to find him, the pink-haired boy muttered, getting to his feet. Igneal's waiting for me to find him. Yeah, he's just hiding somewhere and I gotta track him down. His own words seemed to fuel his new resolve, and with a determined expression on his face, the boy marched into the forest. Here I come, Igneal. Wait for me. He couldn't lose his father now. Igneal was all he had. Venturing away from the verdant abode that he had shared with the fire dragon for years was a somewhat scary experience. But Natsu didn't care. His foster father was waiting for him. He walked for miles, asking anyone he came across whether they had seen Igneal. For some reason they all looked at him like he was the stupidest thing to exist on the face of the planet. Anyone who openly doubted him got a flaming fist to the face. He soon came to a small town. Despite his lack of social interaction with other humans, he boldly marched up to a dark wooden building that had loud music blaring from it. People were drinking something and laughing themselves silly. Surely these guys would know where Igneal was, right? A dragon? Are you daft, boy? Dragons don't exist anymore, grunted the bartender, polishing one of the glasses behind the counter. Yes, they do, Natsu growled, balling his hands into fists. This man didn't believe him either. I was raised by one, the man laughed at him. The mockery snapped Natsu's already wire-thin control, and he launched himself over the counter and decked the bartender in the face. Then he ran out of the bar, shouting, Damn it! Damn it! What's got that kid all riled up? Muttered one of the patrons, stealing a glance at the bartender. Bet you he's been reading too many fairy tales. Just leave him alone, sighed his companion, chugging down his beer. Kids these days, always thinking about fairies and dragons, and Jack's hit about reality. A hooded man sitting 2 tables away suddenly got up. It's not nice to stomp all over a kid's dreams, you know, he said, walking up to the 2 patrons with a suspiciously casual air. Buddy, you can't be thinking dragons are real, the second patron laughed, slapping a hand against the wooden surface of the table. D'you read fairy tales too? Them's for pansies. The hooded man looked darkly at the partially drunk patron. Everyone in the bar suddenly choked on their alcohol as a heavy, crushing pressure came down on their heads. The 2 patrons stared up at the hooded man with wide, fearful eyes, whimpering as the power of sheer rage slammed into them full force. The hooded man leaned over, hissing sharply into the second patron's ear. You haven't seen what I've seen, you piss-poor excuse of a mortal fool. A foul odor permeated the air as the second patron soiled his pants. The hooded man backed away in disgust. WW, who are you? Stammered the other man, trying to hide the growing wet spot on the front of his pants. What are you? The hooded man scoffed. Who am I? What am I? I am your worst nightmare, he whispered sibilantly, his eyes flashing blood red from beneath his hood. The 2 patrons screamed at the sight and promptly fainted, foaming at the mouth. The others watched scared, as the hooded man pivoted on his heel and walked out of the bar. Wimps. If you've got nothing nice to say, just keep your damn mouths shut or I'll shut them for you, he tossed back. Then he was gone. Once the man felt he was a sufficient distance away from the bar, he dropped the serious facade and completely cracked up, clutching his gut as wild laughter spilled from his throat. The bystanders gave him a wide berth, thinking he was some kind of crazy who lost it in the middle of the street. Oh man, the looks on their faces, scaring the bat's hit out of certain people always made for some fantastic entertainment. Well, at least he thought so. Once his chuckles subsided, he remembered what that whole deal had been about in the first place. The pink-haired boy with the white scarf had been looking for a dragon. Frankly, he hadn't realized they still existed after the whole chaotic fiasco that occurred about 400 years ago. Children tended to be more blunt about things, and the conviction in the boy's voice convinced the man that the boy really believed he'd been raised by a dragon. He straightened and decided to track the boy down so he could speak to him. It didn't take long to find the boy, especially when he ran around punching people who refused to believe him, accidentally destroying parts of his surroundings as well. He should take the boy and get out of here before the townspeople formed a mob and demanded monetary reparations. Yeah, what do you want? The boy snarled rudely. Are you gonna tell me dragons don't exist too? On the contrary, I know they exist, the hooded man replied cheerfully. The kid's eyes went round with excitement. You know where Igneel is? He asked eagerly, rushing up to the hooded stranger. Well, not exactly, the kid visibly deflated, but the man continued. However, I do know a way for you to get stronger while searching for him. You mean it, mister? The enthusiasm radiating off the pink-haired boy was almost palpable. His small body was practically vibrating with anticipation. Show me, the hooded man laughed. We have to walk there, all right? Follow me, he said. The boy fell into step beside him, giving no thought to the possibility that the man could be lying to him to lure him into a trap. He hummed noisily as he swung his arms about. I'm gonna find Igneel. I'm gonna find Igneel. The man smiled under his hood at the boy's childishly joyful spirit. Ah, the power of youth, he thought wistfully. He couldn't quite remember who said it first, just someone from way back in his generation who had been extremely green. Wasn't his name Broccoli or something like that? Ah, well, close enough. What's your name, by the way? I'm Natsu. The boy introduced himself cheerfully. Oh, my name isn't important, said the man brightly. You'll find out when we get there. Are you scared? Of course you are. I'm the great Natsu Igneel, the fire dragon slayer. Natsu loudly boasted, thumbing at his chest. The man chortled at the boy's sheer audacity and confidence. Natsu glared at him and stomped his foot on the ground, but all that did was make the man laugh harder. Hey, are you doubting me? Natsu shouted, encasing one of his fists in flames. I'll show you the power of a dragon slayer. Raya! He leaped towards the hooded man, letting out a war cry. Much to his shock, the man blocked him without even trying, all the while still chuckling. Natsu quickly recovered and tried to strike with his right leg. The kick impacted the man's arm, but he didn't even budge. Starting to get frustrated, Natsu dropped to the ground to see if he could deal any damage to the man's legs. He yelped when the man picked him up by the scruff of his scarf before he could attack. Fiery one, aren't you? Asked the hooded man, ignoring the way Natsu flailed around in his grip. Let me go, you bastard! I'll kill ya! Natsu roared, swinging his limbs wildly in an attempt to do something, anything to make the man let go of him. But his arms and legs were just too short to reach him. Curses! Natsu pouted, crossing his arms petulantly as he hung in the air. Jerk, he grumbled. That's a good boy. The man set him down gently, readjusting the scarf around Natsu's neck. Now let's go. I want to get there before nightfall. The boy reluctantly followed after him, knowing that this strong stranger was currently his only lead. Where are we going anyway? Are you gonna tell me or not? He demanded. Have you ever heard a fairy tale, Natsu? That's where we're going, the man replied. The man chortled again. No, not a fairy tale, Natsu. Fairy tale is the name of a wizard's guild in Magnolia. That's our destination, he corrected. The dragon slayer's eyes began to sparkle. A wizard's guild? How cool. You're strong, old man, so does that mean you're a mage from this fairy tale? If I go there, I bet I'll be as strong as you. No, I'm gonna be even stronger. Hey, look out, I'm gonna surpass you one day, Natsu declared, punching a fiery fist into the air and conveniently forgetting that he had been annoyed with his travel companion not even 5 minutes prior. That's the spirit, Chibi, the hooded man said, patting the little boy on the head. Natsu's eyes narrowed and flames gushed out of his mouth as he yelled loudly enough to be heard from the heavens. I'm not a chibi. Whoa there, firecracker, take it easy. The hooded man exclaimed, waving his hands around. Natsu was literally spitting fire as he glared death at his companion. I'm not a chibi, he ground out harshly. I'm a dragon slayer. I ain't no cutesy little thing that you can play around with. I'm strong and fierce, like a dragon. I'm sure you're the absolute paragon of ferocity, firecracker, the man chuckled, attempting to calm down the fuming little boy. Error, stop making fun of me. Bastard. Natsu shouted, punching the tall man in the stomach, the only spot above the man's waist that he could reach. He yelped upon impact and quickly drew his hand away, cringing. So that wasn't the brightest idea he's ever had. Punching the man's stomach felt like punching a solid steel wall. Yeah, don't do that, okay? You're just going to hurt yourself that way, the man advised sagely. Natsu blew him a raspberry. The man just brushed it off with a laugh and held out his hand. Let's go, Natsu, he said gently. To your new home. I'm not a baby, you jerk, Natsu grumbled, but he took the man's hand anyway. The strength and warmth radiating from the man's hand made him feel safe and secure, sort of like how Igneel made him feel. And as they walked off in the direction where the guild waited, the pink-haired boy found that he didn't feel quite as lonely as he did before. You're X782, N. Come out and fight me like a man, roared Natsu, bursting into the guild. It was a testimony to how often he did this that only one person sprayed beer out of their mouth when he charged in unexpectedly. Unless you're too scared to face me, ha ha ha, I chirped Happy, a flying blue cat who had hatched from an egg Natsu had found 4 years ago. He followed Natsu in and landed on one of the tables, his magical white wings vanishing from his back as he stopped using Era. Then it's my win by default. Ha 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 ha. Natsu crowed, spouting a small spurt of flames out of his mouth in excitement. But I really want to fight him. I'm all fired up now. Shut up, Flame Brain, no one wants to hear your lousy boasting, groused Gray, who once again had yet to notice that he had stripped down to his boxers. Natsu turned to his archrival with an insulted expression. Want to say that to my face, droopy eyes? He challenged. I'll say it to you however I want, charcoal boy. Charcoal? I'll show you who's charcoal, ice stripper. Bring it on, baby lizard, you're going down. Popsicle stick. Lisa giggled at her friend's antics as they started throwing punches at each other like usual, all the while exchanging insults like it was going out of style. By now it was such a common occurrence that going a day without seeing them brawling it out on the floor seemed wrong. Of course, whenever Natsu and Gray started fighting, the other members seemed to have some sense of obligation to chime in with their own opinions, thus beginning the usual fairy tale all-guild fight that ended the lives of many tables, chairs, and mugs. Man! If you're a man, fight with your fists! Shouted Elfman, thrusting a fist up into the air. Man, shut up! Natsu and Gray simultaneously yelled, punching the muscular mage to the other side of the beer hall. Then they glared at each other and started their own personal brawl anew. Noisy fools! Why can't you keep quiet and let a woman drink in peace, huh? Kana Albrona, a teenage mage with long, wavy brown hair, snapped, slamming her barrel of alcohol down on the table. In another part of the hall, Urza and Mirajane were also butting heads. You want to fight, you flat-chested hag? Spat Mirajane, slamming her forehead against Urza's. Bring it, you midriff-bearing cow! Urza shot back, equally as fierce. Both of them fired up their auras as they struggled against each other in a contest of brute strength. The youngsters are at it again, sighed Wakaba, puffing on the pipe in his mouth. Must be nice to be so young. His longtime buddy Mikau laughed with him, chugging down the beer in his mug. I sure wish we were that young again. Ah, those were the good old days, weren't they? He said. Boy, were they ever. In fact, do you remember when? Wakaba was interrupted as an empty mug flew out of nowhere and smashed into his head, making him topple off the bench and onto the ground, dazed. Wakaba! Oh, you youngsters did it now. Let me give you a taste of, nobody cares. And Mikau ended up being KO'd by a single punch. He laid on the ground, mentally berating himself for his pathetic performance. The guild fight continued on for another 2 minutes, before Makarov came out and ended it by growing into his titan form and reprimanding all of them at once. The fighting stopped immediately. After the mess was cleaned up and new tables were brought in, Natsu bounded up to Makarov with an excited look. Ji-chan! Where's En? I want to fight him. I'm not telling you, Natsu, Makarov sighed. He's Fairy Tail's shadow guardian, he can't. Yeah, can't show his face in public, blah blah blah, Natsu grumbled. I still want to fight him. En. Come on out. I've gotten loads stronger since last time. Makarov had slapped him upside the head with an enlarged hand, sending Natsu face first into the floor. He's not going to show up and break the laws of shadow guardianship just because you asked him to, the old guild master muttered, taking a large sip of his beer. Stop making a ruckus and go do a mission. Natsu sat up, spitting splinters from his mouth, but before he could retort, he was interrupted. Natsu! Let's go fishing, Happy said, walking over to them holding a fishing pole in his paws. I want to eat fish. His eyes started to sparkle as he imagined a big, juicy fish being served to him on a plate. Drool began to drip from the corner of his mouth. Ooh, that sounds like a great idea, Happy! Natsu exclaimed, forgetting about En for the moment. He took the fishing pole from Happy and started to march out of the guild. Yosh, let's go. Aye, sir. The blue cat cheered, following his partner out the door. Later, as the takeover trio headed out on Mirajane's next S-class mission, they came upon Natsu and Happy pointedly ignoring each other, as they sat underneath the tree in Magnolia's South Gate Park. What are you two fighting about now? Lee-sana asked, walking up to them. Natsu ate all of my fish, Happy stated angrily. Even though I was the one who invited him to go fishing, Natsu harumphed, crossing his arms. Not my fault you're so slow, he muttered. Natsu, you can't be like that, Lee-sana chided gently. Happy's our child, remember? You have to be a good father and make up with him. Natsu's cheeks turned pink, and he grumbled something under his breath. Are you blushing? How cute, Mirajane crooned. Shut up. I am not blushing. Natsu vehemently denied. He likes her, Happy purred, giggling. No, I don't. Stop saying it that way. Natsu sputtered. Lee-sana laughed softly and laced her fingers behind her back. That's better. I don't like it when you two ignore each other, she said, smiling. Well, we have to go, so I'll see you later, Natsu. Happy. Natsu perked up. Wait, are you going on an S-class mission? Can I come? He asked eagerly, leaping up from his spot. Lee-sana shook her head. Sorry, Natsu. Elf Niken and I are just going to support Mirane, she apologized. Besides, S-class missions are too dangerous for you right now. You're not ready yet, Mirajane added. That's not fair, I want to go on one too. Natsu complained. Why do you get to go, Lee-sana? Hee. Well, we are siblings after all. Don't worry about it, Natsu, you'll definitely be an S-class mage one day. Then you can do S-class missions too, Lee-sana encouraged. Bye now. See you when we get back. She turned around to head out of the park with her brother and sister. Yeah, see you, Natsu grumbled, half-heartedly waving them off. Happy flew onto Natsu's head and waved goodbye to them from there. When the trio vanished from sight, Natsu took Happy off his head and looked at him seriously. Happy gazed back, clearly confused. Natsu looked away briefly, muttering something unintelligible under his breath, then said, "Let's go fishing again. I'll save some for you this time." Happy lit up with pure joy and he held a paw up in agreement. Aye. Natsu grinned. But just when everything seemed right again, the world shattered under their feet. Mary Jane and Elfman returned from the mission, completely distraught and missing one member. Mary Jane couldn't keep herself together long enough to tell them what happened, so Elfman had to do it. Natsu stood stock still, whispering in disbelief, "Lee-sana's dead? That couldn't be true. She told them she would see them when she got back. She couldn't die yet." The guild hall was deathly quiet for once. The only sound that could be heard was Mary Jane's uncontrollable sobbing. Elfman was also crying, one hand covering his face, as he repeated, I'm sorry, I couldn't control it, it's all my fault." Numb with shock, Natsu slowly turned around and walked out of the guild, Happy stumbling behind him. It was pouring outside, like the heavens themselves were mourning Lee-sana's death. He couldn't feel it, just a peculiar chill seeping into his bones that even his fire couldn't warm. Lee-sana was dead. She was gone. He wouldn't see her smile at him again, wouldn't hear her voice as she scolded him and Happy for their immature behavior. He wouldn't see her ever again, because she wasn't coming back. The dead couldn't come back to life. It was like the color had seeped out of the world. Everything was wet and gray and dull, just like his heart felt. Natsu's feet automatically took him to the hut Lee-sana had built when they had been hatching Happy's egg. He gazed upon it, unable to tell whether the moisture on his face was rain or tears. Even the hut looked like it had been leached of life. He sank to the ground, clenching fistfuls of mud. "Lee-sana," he cried. Angrily, he slammed a fist against the ground. "Damn it! I knew I should have gone. If I'd gone, maybe she'd still be alive." Lee-sana sobbed Happy, his paws clamped over his eyes. "Wah!" A firm hand came down on Natsu's shoulder, jerking him out of his moment of self-reproach. He furiously scrubbed at his eyes before he looked up, the familiar name falling from his lips, and his voice sounded thick and hoarse from crying. Although he couldn't see En's face from underneath the black hood he had over his head, he could feel the support that En was lending him. Natsu swiftly stood up and hugged the other man, trying his hardest to hold back his tears and failing. "It's all right to cry," Natsu En soothed. "Let it all out. I should have gone with them," he wept. Lee-sana's dead now because I didn't. I will. I'll get so strong that my name will burn the heavens down. I'll get stronger, a lot stronger, so that I don't lose anyone ever again." Natsu howled, pulling away from En to scream his conviction aloud. "You hear that, God? I'll make sure you don't steal anyone away from me ever again. I'll even become a god slayer if that's what it takes to protect my friends. That's the way to do it, Firecracker," En said softly, placing a hand on top of Natsu's head. Natsu sniffled, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. "But En, you're the guild's shadow guardian, aren't you?" he murmured. "You could have gone after them, couldn't you? You could have saved Lee-sana, right?" Furious eyes still trailing tears at the edges glared at En. "Answer me, En," En sighed. "I may be Fairy Tale's shadow guardian, but I'm not omnipotent, Natsu. I can't do everything," he answered solemnly. "I don't have the power to see into the future. Even if I did, my role is to be Fairy Tale's protector, not its babysitter." "Damn it," Natsu cursed, bowing his head. "Fuck this. Fuck everything. I'm going to train so hard that my roar will be heard from the other side of the world. For Lee-sana, I believe you can, Natsu. Just remember that you aren't alone. Lee-sana will always be here." He took Natsu's muddy hand and placed it over the pink-haired boy's heart. "So never allow yourself to give into the darkness, alright? Don't allow your grief to consume you. Get stronger and protect your comrades with everything you have." He let go of Natsu's hand and stepped back. "Wait, En." En vanished, his last words echoing in the rain. "Believe in yourself, Firecracker, and I'll believe in you, too." Natsu stared at the spot where En had been, no longer crying. He clenched his fists. "I'll do it, En. Just watch me. I'll make the heavens roar with my fury," he vowed. "Natsu." The pink-haired boy looked down at his feet, where Happy clung to his leg. Natsu scooped his partner up and let the cat rest on his head. "What's wrong, Happy?" he asked. "Was that the En guy you're always looking for?" Happy questioned. "Yeah, that was him," Natsu replied. "Pretty cool, isn't he?" "Yeah, we're going to be okay, aren't we, Natsu?" Happy sniffled, wiping away the last traces of tears from his face. "We will be," Natsu replied resolutely, resting a hand on Happy's head. They both looked up as the rain stopped, and the first rays of sunshine began to peek through the gray clouds. "I promise." Chapter 2, Phantom Fury. Year X686. "Hey, En?" Can I ask you something? And opened his eyes, turning his head to look down at the first guild master. What is it? Where do you stay during the night when everyone is away? She asked curiously, and laughed sheepishly and scratched the back of his head. I don't have a place here, so I just sleep on the roof, he responded. What? That's not a good place to sleep, and she argued. It's got to be cold and windy up there. And roof tiles can't be comfortable to nap on, either. I've slept in worse conditions before. A few roof tiles and a baby breeze don't bother me, he replied, leaning casually against the wall. No, that won't do, muttered Mavis, standing up. She crouched down and opened the bottom drawer of the desk, shuffling through the files neatly organized and stored in cream-colored folders. She drew out a large piece of paper, folded into quarters, and leaned over to examine it as she spread it out on top of the desk. Is this Fairy Tale's original blueprint? He queried, his eyes roaming over every detail of the blue map. Mavis smoothed out the fold lines on the blueprint so she could see it better. It is, she answered. I kept it in case we needed to make any changes or major repairs in the future. I didn't think we would need to make a change this soon, though, and gave her a puzzled look. What are you talking about? Why make a change when you just built the guild? He asked. Mavis looked up at him, a frown set on her face. It would be remiss of me as Fairy Tale's guild master to allow one of my members to sleep in such unsavory conditions. Therefore, I'm sure we can find a spot on this blueprint to add in a private room for you, she explained, waving her hand over the map. You don't have to do that, Mavis-chan, and protested quickly. I said sleeping on the roof doesn't bother me. No, you can't, Mavis said, raising herself to her full height. It would have been a comical sight, a petite slip of a girl glaring up at a man who cleared the 6-foot mark, if not for the seriousness of the situation. Listen here, En, if you want to be a good shadow guardian, you have to start thinking of Fairy Tale as your new family. And as a family, we take care of each other, right? En nodded slowly. But you know he began. Mavis stamped her foot on the floor. I don't care about that right now, she cried, feeling uncharacteristically frustrated. And you have to understand that Fairy Tale is supposed to be a big family, and a place that you can return to and call home. You're not protecting a building, you're protecting a guild. She pointed her finger at his face, making him blink at her in surprise. Promise me, En. Promise me that you'll start thinking of Fairy Tale as your new family. Memories of his original family, his parents, his friends from his homeland, the village that he lived in, his former fellow Jinchuriki, passed through his mind. The memories had eroded over the years, only tiny, significant fragments still holding out strong in his head. Then came bits and pieces from various years after the elemental nations fell to ruin, of people he had met, bonded with, fought with, and watched die. She wanted Fairy Tale to be his family, but how could it be when he was immortal, a relic from a time long past? All the family he's ever had already been cruelly ripped away from him by time. Labeling the guild with such a term would only hurt him in the long run. He shook his head. I can't, Mavis, he told her solemnly. I won't promise something that I know I won't be able to keep. Hearing her name without a suffix tagged onto it let her know that he was serious. Her eyes fell. Why not, En? She asked quietly, her hand dropping back to her side. Is it because of how old you are? Something like that. I'm old, little lady. Far older than you are, he replied, turning to look out the window. I can't have a family. I'll just outlive every single one of them. I can't let myself get attached, because it'll just mean more pain for me in the end. He didn't turn around when he heard the soft rustling of Mavis' dress behind him, but he did start when small arms wrapped around his waist. He felt Mavis whisper against his cloak, You don't have to be alone, and, no, Naruto. I don't know how old you are, and I'll keep guessing until I get it right, but you've probably been really lonely, right? Well, not anymore. I'll make sure of it. Fairy Tale will become your new family, you'll see. And stayed silent, staring out the window at the enormous lake that Magnolia had been built next to. Small waves lapped softly at the edge of the mini beach. The sun was high in the sky, turning the sky a brilliant shade of baby blue that was eclipsed only by a few lazy clouds. Fishermen were out on their boats, catching their meals for the day. Every now and then, a bird swooped out of the sky and plunged its beak into the water, pulling up with a wriggling silvery fish in its mouth. All in all, it seemed like a fairly normal day, but to someone like En, who had spent the majority of his long lifetime fighting in one battle after another, the peace found in Magnolia seemed like a dream come true. Maybe it was time to let go, after all. He exhaled slowly, one of his hands moving up to rest on her arms. I can't promise anything, he finally answered. But for the sake of my own sanity, I will try. Mavis' arms tightened around him briefly. Thank you, Naruto, she mumbled into his cloak. She stepped back, and smiled brightly at him when he turned around. Now let's find a place to make a room for you. She bounced back to her desk and patted the blueprint, and held up a hand. That won't be necessary, he said. I don't need a full-size room. Something small will be enough. Are you sure? You're a pretty big guy, Mavis asked, nibbling on her lower lip. What, you don't trust me, little lady? I'm hurt, En said, faking an insulted expression. Mavis scowled. En. I'm trying to be serious here, she whined, smacking a hand down on the blueprint. Come on, At least help me figure out where to put you, and laughed. So impatient, little lady, he teased, leaning over the desk again to look at the blueprint. At this rate, you'll never find a boyfriend. Hey, are you making fun of me? Mavis cried, narrowing her eyes at the grinning blonde. I'm just kidding around, little lady. You need some humor to lighten up your life. Anne replied cheerfully. If you frown all the time, your face might be permanently stuck that way, you know. What? No, it won't. Stop trying to scare me, Anne, but it's more fun this way, don't you agree? No, I don't. Hey, quit it. What are you doing with that? Give it back, you'll have to catch me first, little lady. As the two bantered back and forth, the serious mood completely vanished from the office, like it had never existed in the first place. But their talk wouldn't be forgotten, and years later, Anne would realize that maybe he had finally found the right place after all. Year X784, and rested quietly in a hidden alcove adjacent to the guild master's office. Hand-drawn paper seals camouflaged the opening to prevent it from being seen by the people in the guild. The alcove had been Mavis' final solution to solve the problem of Anne sleeping outside on the guild's roof. It was a small room, only big enough for a bed, a desk, and a small closet, but it was enough for Anne. He didn't need anything fancy, just a place for him to sleep. He heard a strange noise outside, like the sound of steel hitting the ground. Silently, he stood up, sliding his mask over his face. He melted into the shadows, traveling instantly to the rooftop so he could get a full 360-degree view of the city. He appeared just in time to witness a huge iron rod being hurled towards the guild at full speed. Reacting quickly, he used the light pen in his pocket to draw a seal in the air. Barrier seal, activate! A thick wall of purple light flared to life around the guild. The iron rod impacted with it a split second later, ricocheting off the barrier with a loud clanging sound that reverberated through the street. The iron rod crashed into a building diagonally across from Fairy Tale, causing its fire alarms to blare piercingly. Thankfully, it appeared to be vacant of people. Not wasting a moment, and summoned 5 shadow clones to aid him. You two, go after whoever is attacking the guild, he ordered to the 2 clones on his left. They both saluted to him, and jumped to the nearby roof, rapidly descending to the ground. He heard someone below exclaim, "What the hell? Gotcha, he's at 2 o'clock, 50 yards ahead." He shouted to his clones, "We know, boss." They had already changed course and converged on the adversary. A loud curse, followed by the sound of metal versus metal, indicated that his clones had engaged the enemy, and nodded, then turned to his other 3 clones. "You go silence the alarms from that building. We don't need citizens getting involved in this," he said to the leftmost clone. "Yes, sir." The clone took off running for the building, his hands already flashing through the hand seals for a water jutsu to put out the fire that began to blaze up from within. "You two are going to help me set up more seals around the perimeter in case there are more enemies," and told the last 2 clones. "You both should have a light pen with you. You know what to do. But hurry!" His clones nodded and leaped away to do their assigned duty, and turned his attention back to the battle being waged between the hidden opponent and his other clones. His battle clones were starting to overwhelm the enemy, it looked like. But a moment later, he was hit by a rush of memories. The enemy had gotten in a lucky shot right to the face, and dispelled one of the clones. The other one was still going strong. From his clone's memories, he learned that the opponent was a young man with wild, spiky sable hair that reached down to his waist. He had slanted red eyes and multiple piercings on his face and his arms. He wore a studded waistcoat with a black, wing-like adornment attached over his right breast, white pants, and studded black boots. The man's attacks were rather interesting, because he could turn his limbs into iron weapons and extend them to attack. His footwork wasn't too shabby either. Given the nature of his attacks, it also appeared that his defensive capabilities were much more advanced than most people's tended to be. That was the extent of the analysis that the clone had performed before he had been dispelled. The guy wasn't half bad. The fact that he hadn't already been defeated and dragged back to N by his other clones said something about the man's fighting abilities. The fire alarms went blissfully silent at last. N grimaced as he rubbed his ear. He hated alarms. They always grated on his nerves because of his sensitive hearing. Having done his duty, the lone clone he had sent to take care of the building returned to the guild's rooftop. "Thanks," N said, clapping a hand on the clone's right shoulder. Those alarms were getting annoying. The clone scowled behind his mask. "I had to get up close and personal with them, so don't blame me if your ears are still ringing when I dispel," he told N. "But aside from that, what's the plan now? Want me on evacuation duty?" North surveyed the street, noticing that there were a few people coming out of their homes, wondering what all the ruckus was. "Yeah. Make sure those citizens are safe. I don't want them mixed up in this fight. I'll send some guys down after you to help." His clone nodded. "Got it, boss," he said, saluting. The clone descended to the street, and swiftly made his way over to the people, and created an extra 3 shadow clones to help the lone clone out. The barrier seal he had written in the air suddenly flared with a violent purple light. A rectangular, prism-like barrier shimmered into existence, completely encompassing Fairy Tale in all its shiny, translucent purple glory. Fairy Tail was now untouchable to most physical attacks and magic spells. "We're finished, boss," the clones he had sent to set up the other barrier seals said, landing on the rooftop beside him. "All anchor points have been secured." "Excellent," said En proudly. They both gave him a thumbs up. "But someone might try to erase the anchor point seals, so I want you two to each guard one point. I'll send another clone out to guard the third one." "Yes, boss." As soon as they leaped away, a gray funnel shot into the air from the direction where his battle clone had the enemy engaged. The clone had enough sense to dodge the deadly attack, but it clipped him on the shoulder. Muttering something under his breath, the clone rebounded off the nearest wall and rocketed towards his opponent again, this time forming a spiraling blue sphere of chakra in his right palm. Raisin Gan! A huge cloud of debris erupted as the swirling chakra ball impacted with his opponent, and sent him flying into the building behind him. The building collapsed with a thunderous roar as the man broke through several of the building's supports, causing the top part to become unbalanced and fall forward. The clone's sweat dropped at the damage. "I guess I went overboard, sorry, boss," the clone said sheepishly, scratching the back of his head. Then an iron rod blasted a hole through the collapsed part of the building and his opponent crawled out, panting heavily. His skin was covered by a hard, metallic sheen reminiscent of a dragon's scales, and he was chewing noisily on some scraps of iron from the building. When he was done, the man glared at the end clone and snarled, "I'm not finished yet, you bastard blonde." Iron Dragon's roar! The same gray whirlwind from before spewed out of the enemy's mouth, heading straight towards the clone. "Ah shit," the clone sighed. "Thought I took you out already." He took the light pen out of his pocket, and was prepared to draw a seal to deflect his opponent's attack back at him, but he suddenly found himself on the rooftop, the pen still outstretched. "What the hell, that bastard!" the clone cried, realizing that N had switched with him. "He was my opponent, damn it!" "Fuck you, original!" He flipped the bird in the direction where the battle was now being waged between the original N and the enemy, and grinned, his sharp hearing catching his clone's swearing. He nimbly sidestepped the attack, letting it roar past him. Then he leaped forward, smashing a perfect right hook into his opponent's face. It definitely stung a bit because the man's skin was hard as steel, but the blow still made the black-haired man reel back in pain. It was the perfect opportunity. And drew 2 fingers down the markings on his arm, grabbing the scroll that popped out. "Nighty-night, little dragon slayer," he sang, opening the scroll and writing a seal in the air. The man's eyes widened in panic, and he barely had time to say fuck before he vanished into the scroll. Several apartments had been damaged, too. But it looked like his other clones had done what they were supposed to and evacuated all the people out of the immediate area so they didn't get caught in the crossfire. And nodded. Not too bad, considering Fairy Tail tended to cause mass property damage wherever they went, anyway. "What happened here? Who are you and what are you doing to the guild?" A distinctly female voice shouted up at him from the street below. "Answer me, or I will blast you into the next century." "Easy there, princess," and said, holding up his hands. "I can explain. Long story or short? Just hurry up and tell me who the hell you are and what that purple thing around my guild is." The magic card user barked. "Short story it is." "Sheesh, women are so impatient sometimes," and muttered, crossing his arms over his bare chest. "To put it bluntly, I just saved your guild from being demolished in the middle of the night." "Yeah, right, I wasn't born yesterday, you know," the woman scoffed. "It's true. This purple thing you're referring to is actually a 4-point barrier that I activated to keep your guild safe from any attacks. See that iron rod over there?" Anne asked, pointing towards the busted building. "The barrier I set up deflected that thing. Otherwise your guild would resemble a pincushion by now." The woman was still eyeing him suspiciously. "And where is the guy who did it, she drawled. "The only enemy I see here is you." 3 cards flashed in front of her. Heaven, reverse death, mountain. I summon lightning. Green lightning bolts struck at N from above. N sidestepped the attack with ease. "I'm not lying, you know. There'd be no point. If you want proof, you'll need to ask Makarov-san to be here. I've already captured the man who attacked the guild, but I'd rather not let him out right now," and said, chuckling. "He's rather volatile. Why would you defend the guild? I've never seen you before, so you aren't a fairy tale wizard. Tell me your name," the woman demanded. She held 2 cards between her fingers, ready to fly at a moment's notice. "I'm not at liberty to say that, unfortunately. You'll have to ask Makarov-san," and replied pleasantly. Inwardly, he was just wishing that the woman would stop being so suspicious. Do one good thing and end up in a pile of shit a mile high. Well, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but if you want proof, then look here. He tapped a finger against the black Fairy Tail Guild insignia stamped on his chest. The woman gasped. She lowered her cards. But how? I've never seen you before." "You're a fairy tale wizard?" she asked incredulously. "I'm not a fairy tale wizard per se," said N, scratching the back of his head. "But yes, I am a part of Fairy Tail. Believe me, I mean no harm to our guild." The woman studied him carefully. "Take off your mask," she quietly commanded. "Let me take a good look at your face. Maybe I'll remember you if you do," and shook his head. "You won't, I can guarantee it. There's a reason why I'm wearing a mask at all. What you want to know, You will have to ask Makarov-san. He may or may not answer you, though. I know I can't, he replied. After all, that would be a breach of my contract. Contract? What contract? Just ask Makarov-san. If you'll excuse me, I would like to sleep now, so good night. And vanished into the shadows before he could hear the woman's reply. Truthfully, he wasn't tired at all. He just wanted to get away from the nosy woman. He could understand that she was just trying to defend her guild from a potential enemy. But for heaven's sake, he had been protecting Fairy Tail for longer than she'd been alive. He made it back to his alcove in record time. He unsealed the scroll that he had stored the enemy in and placed it on the chair at his desk. He slapped down a gravity seal, a binding seal, and a nerve-numbing seal in triangular formation around the scroll. Satisfied that the three together should hold the man prisoner long enough to interrogate him, he released the seal on the scroll. The wild-haired dragon slayer popped out of the scroll with a gasp, falling onto the chair with a heavy thump, and smirked when the man realized that he couldn't move. He loomed over the other man with a demonic glint in his eye, although the effect didn't have as much impact since he still had his mask over his face. To his credit, the man didn't show an ounce of fear in his body language, only a smidgen in his eyes. What do you want, you fairy trash? The man spat, looking enraged. You, my friend, are going to give me some answers, and said, smiling creepily behind his mask. Some of his ominous aura must have leaked out, because his prisoner suddenly looked a lot more wary. His eyes turned crimson, much to the man's horror, and began to gleam with an unholy light. Don't worry, I won't hurt you much. The next morning dawned bright and early. As the sun began to ascend in the sky, bestowing the first rays of its golden light upon the city of Magnolia, it should have been a perfectly normal day. But it wasn't. The havoc wreaked upon the city the night before had taken its toll. The building that had been smashed into kindling by the iron rod turned out to be a very important insurance company for homeowners. Had their building not been damaged, they could have been covering construction costs for rebuilding some of the citizens' homes. But as it stood, with the fire damage and financial losses for their own company as a result of the destruction to their building, they were in no position to help the citizens. This made for some very angry Magnolians, especially the ones who had lost their homes to the previous night's battle. Obviously, all of this damage was blamed on Fairy Tail, the rowdiest and most destructive guild that existed in their area. When Makarov found out, he froze in front of the guild and began to cry loudly about how the council was probably going to come and put him in jail because of this. Master! The diminutive guild master turned watery eyes towards one of his guild members, Kana Alberona. The half-naked woman marched up to him, wearing an unusually serious face. She stopped in front of him, biting her lip absently as she struggled to think of what to say. Master, I met someone strange last night. He's the one who put this purple thing around the guild, she said, gesturing to the gently shimmering barrier that was still visible against the bright sky. He told me to ask you if I wanted answers. So give it to me straight. Who the hell is he? Must have been N, thought the old guild master. No one else can do something like this. Did he have a black fairy tail mark on his chest? Makarov asked. He had to be certain before he could think of how to explain N's presence to Kana. Yeah, it was right over his heart, Kana replied. I see. Will you tell me what you saw last night, Kana? I'd like to know what happened around here yesterday to cause all this damage, Makarov requested, glancing around at the ruined buildings. What had N done to cause this much destruction to the city? Kana folded her arms over her chest, causing her significantly large breasts to pop out even more, to Makarov's secret delight. I didn't see the whole thing. I woke up because I heard the sound of something crashing and it was extremely loud. I looked out of my window and saw this barrier thing over Fairy Tail, and rushed over as quickly as I could because I thought it was under attack. When I got there, someone was standing on the roof, and I confronted him. He's the one I want to know about, Master. Who is he? She asked. The thing I'm most confused about is how he is a Fairy Tail member when I don't ever recall seeing him around. Is he like Mystigan? Makarov reached up and stroked his mustache. Something like that, the elderly guild master answered. None know his true name, but we, that is, the former guild masters of Fairy Tail and I, have always referred to him by his alias, N. N? Wait a second, you mean he's the guy Natsu's always running his mouth off about? That N? Kana exclaimed, incredulous. The very same, I wager, Makarov confirmed, turning to look at the glowing barrier around his beloved guild. Have you ever heard of the term Shadow Guardian, Kana? The alcohol-addicted mage shook her head. A Shadow Guardian? What's that? She questioned. It is an ancient partnership made between a person and a guild. The person will become the guild's shadow, meaning they will be the guild's secret guardian behind the scenes, and therefore are not allowed to reveal their name or face to anyone except the guild master or succeeding guild master once the contract has been accepted. The Shadow Guardian's natural longevity and durability is boosted to help them support their chosen guild better. The partnership usually lasts until the guardian dies or is freed by the current guild master. N is a bit of a special case, though that's all I can say about the matter. His secrets are not mine to reveal, Makarov explained. So that's what he meant when he told me he wasn't allowed to give me his name, Kana muttered, looking contemplative. She also turned to look up at the guild, watching as the translucent barrier rippled gently in the breeze. Her lips quirked into a brief smile. Last night, the barrier had seemed ghostly and evil in the darkness of the night, but during the day, it looked rather pretty, its shimmering surface reminding her of a sheet of sheer fabric swaying on a clothesline. Master! Makarov pivoted on his heel when he heard someone call for him. Levy, followed by Jet and Droy, approached the guild. Master, what happened to the guild? Levy asked, stopping in front of the old guild master. I heard some noise last night, but I thought it was just a dream. You weren't dreaming, Makarov answered grimly. Fairy Tail was attacked last night. Our guild was attacked? Levy gasped, alarmed. Why, and what's this weird-looking thing around it? Jet inquired, perplexed. He tried to poke it. To his disappointment, his finger just went through. Don't worry about it, it's a barrier to keep our guild safe from harm, Kana replied, giving her fellow guild members a small smile. At least none of us were hurt during last night's attempt. What guild would be cowardly enough to launch an attack on us when we're absent? Makarov snorted, walking forward. Fools! They are not worth our time. Guild wars are forbidden by the council, anyway. He walked through the barrier and headed into the guild. Well, if the master says so, that's that, Kana said, shrugging. Come on, let's get the day started. I'm ready to guzzle some alcohol. She stalked into the guild, casting one last glance at the purple barrier shimmering softly in the morning light. Team Shadowgear followed after her, and looked up when the third guild master finally entered the office. Good morning, Makarov-san, he greeted, stepping out from the shadows. Makarov jumped a little, having not expected anyone to be in the office when he came in, and he returned, walking over to his chair. Do you have answers for me? Indeed I do. Although I also have the perpetrator with me if you wish to speak to him yourself, and replied, summoning his scroll. He placed the scroll on Makarov's desk. That will not be necessary if you've already interrogated him, said Makarov, seating himself in the chair and looking every inch the wise old guild master that he was. He laced his fingers together on top of the desk. Now please tell me what you've learned. The perpetrator's name is Gajio Red Fox, the Iron Dragon Slayer from a guild called Phantom Lord. The intention behind last night's attack was to provoke a response from Fairy Tail, so that Phantom Lord can instigate a war and show us that their guild is superior, and reiterated. Their other objective is to capture Lucy Heartfilia, a request from her father. Fairy Tail just happened to be in the way, which is one reason why it was targeted. Phantom Lord, amused Makarov, leaning back in his seat. He looked upset at the thought of his precious guild being attacked, especially when one of the members in particular was the target. That troublesome Jose doesn't know when to quit. Would you like me to take care of them? N inquired, picking his scroll back up and storing it away. I'll make sure they don't bother us again. And I can return their Dragon Slayer while I'm at it. No, N. We will not be the ones to start the war, Makarov replied grimly. Keep him in the scroll for now. We don't need to give them their ace back, and smirked behind his mask. As you wish, Makarov-san. Makarov hopped out of his seat. You can go now, N, he said, dismissing the Shadow Guardian with a wave of his hand. I'm going to get a beer. I'll call for you if something comes up. N bowed, silently slipping back into the shadows of the room. He traveled back to his alcove to plan out his next move. By now, the guild master of Phantom Lord was most likely aware that something had happened to his Dragon Slayer, and as such he would probably send more people to deal with the issue and get Gajio back. Unfortunately for those poor suckers, even if they somehow miraculously got their hands on the scroll, he was the only one who could release the Dragon Slayer from it. Serves them right for trying to bring down his guild. He paused. He really had thought that, hadn't he? His guild. It was just as Mavis predicted. Over the years, Fairy Tail had slowly wormed its way into his heart despite his attempts to maintain some distance from it. He let an exasperated smile grace his face as he sat down on his chair. There was no helping it, he supposed. That's the way Fairy Tail was. He pulled out a sheet of paper from one of the desk drawers and started to map out the area. If Phantom Lord was going to launch a second attack, they wouldn't send just a single person to do it. There were a few ways to approach Fairy Tail. First of all, the streets of Magnolia. They were all entirely straight and either went vertical or horizontal on a map. He scribbled a few arrows on his makeshift map to indicate the direction of the streets. They were created this way so that the city could transform into its guildarts shift at a moment's notice. Phantom Lord members could converge on Fairy Tail from there, although it wouldn't be considered an ideal plan of attack because the city's buildings were in the way. He'd call that method the front door approach. Though if Phantom Lord planned an ambush instead, employing guerrilla tactics to pick off Fairy Tail members one by one, Magnolia would be the perfect battlefield, and drew a large oval behind Fairy Tail, indicating the position and approximate size scale of Lake Ciliora to the city. If Phantom Lord had a ship or some other means of transportation to cross the lake, they could engage Fairy Tail on the mini beach. That would be the backdoor approach, and that place would be slightly trickier to defend because of the sand. The softer ground would hinder both guilds' movements, unless Phantom Lord chose to attack using long-distance weaponry and magic. The last, but least likely option would be by air. A flying ship could drop bomb Lacrima and attack Fairy Tail that way, although the city of Magnolia would also be involved. However, Gajeel had kindly informed him that no, their guild can't fucking fly, so that method was out of the picture. The most advantageous approach for them would be to attack from the back. So he would need to reinforce the anchor seal at the north point and add in some other seals to keep the guild safe. He hadn't been able to get Gajeel to tell him everything, so he could only speculate on a plan of attack at the moment. He scribbled an X at the north anchor point for the barrier seal and drew a triangle that linked it with the two hind corners of the guild. If he could create a deflector there, then, suddenly he heard it, a low rumble that lightly shook the guild. It was like something extremely heavy was causing the earth to tremble. And frowned, and decided to go back up to the roof to check on the disturbance. The shaking got worse. That didn't bode well for the guild, and teleported to the roof, gazing first over Magnolia, then out to Lake Ciliora. His eyes narrowed at the gargantuan contraption that was slowly moving through the water towards the guild. As he expected, Phantom Lord was taking the backdoor approach. He just hadn't thought that they would arrive so soon. There was no time to waste then. He had to get that deflector up pronto. He summoned 2 shadow clones and directed them to the appropriate corners. "We're setting up the Trinity formation," he commanded. "Hurry, we have less than 3 minutes before they get here." "Yes, sir." The clones saluted, jumping off the roof and moving towards their respective corners. As N prepared to link the Trinity formation to the north anchor point of the barrier seal to form a deflector over Fairy Tail's backside, he saw Makarov and other members of the guild running on to the mini-beach. Even from this distance, he could see their shocked faces. Swearing softly under his breath, he worked as quickly as he could. He needed to keep Fairy Tail safe. How could he ever face Mavis again if he allowed her beloved guild to be destroyed? And looked up sharply as the giant, mechanical guild halted in the distance. Something began to jet out of the front, a long, gleaming steel barrel for firing something that even his deflector and 4-point barrier seal combined might not be able to defend against. This was problematic. He hadn't anticipated that Phantom Lord would have such a powerful weapon in their arsenal. He was going to have to deal with this bitch himself. He summoned a clone to take his place in concatenating the Trinity formation and the barrier seal and prepared to join his fellow guild members on the beach. The cannon began to glow as a sphere of dark energy formed at the end of the barrel. "Shit!" and swore. He didn't have time to set something up to help him. This was going to hurt. "Everyone, get back!" He heard a female voice shout loudly from below. His eyes widened when he beheld Fairy Tail's strongest female wizard equipping into her toughest defensive armor, the adamantine armor. She combined the 2 swords in her hands to create a huge shield, which she slammed into the sand in front of her. "Foolish girl," the cannon fired, and leaped off the roof. "Get out of the way!" he roared. The woman yelped in surprise when he landed on the ground and shoved her out of the line of fire. "Hey! What are you doing?" she yelled as she tumbled into the sand, her heavy armor kicking up a large cloud of dust, and ignored her and closed his eyes. "Karama, my old friend, lend me your power." A golden cloak made of pure energy enveloped his body. He held out his arms, spread his feet, and braced himself for the impact, only hearing Makarov's horrified cry of N. Before the blast struck. Chapter 3. Hear the Fairies Roar. Year X784. N. He had faced down 3 megalomaniacs hellbent on enslaving the world, and won. Fight at N. He had suffered through the agony of having the QB ripped away from him, and survived. Hang in there, N. He had stared down the fiery, gaping maws of dragons, and prevailed. Don't you dare give up, N. I'll kick your ass if you do. He had gone toe-to-toe against the darkest, most malevolent mage to exist in Earthland, and lived. Rhea, compared to all the shit he had gone through in the entirety of his 934 years in existence, this puny beam felt like a hotter, but weaker version of one of Tsunade Bachan's affectionate finger flicks. Compared to all the fighting, the battles, the pain, the deaths, the blood, sweat, and tears he had shed, this was nothing. The golden chakra cloak he wore around his body expanded according to his will, forming thin, crisscrossing strands that anchored him to the sandy ground. A pair of thick chakra arms bloomed out of his back, humming gleefully as if they were sentient, and directed them to clamp onto the sides of the Jupiter blast, grunting as he fought to keep himself steady. The blast sizzled angrily, its tiny discharges zipping across his exposed skin. He felt a pair of armored hands press firmly against his back. "I don't know who you are, but you seem to be giving your all to protect our guild," the person behind him murmured in a low voice. "That's good enough for me. Fairy Tail will help you too." And guessed that she was probably the red-haired woman who he had pushed aside earlier. At least she was willing to help him instead of bashing his head in, like he imagined his old pink-haired teammate would have done. Mere moments later, Makarov's voice rang out, seeming to resonate with every mage on the beach. "Go, Fairy Tail wizards. Show them what we are made of. Show them that we are not afraid. Show them that we will fight for our comrades down to our very last breath. Because we are Fairy Tail." A deafening cheer rose up behind N, all of the Fairy Tail mages' voices uniting into a single, defiant cry. They surged forward to support him, each of them linking together to push against the Jupiter blast. Surrounded by their friends, their family, Fairy Tail faced down Jupiter as one, indivisible entity, and smiled under his mask. "Are you watching, Mavis-chan? Look at what Fairy Tail has become. Thank you for your support, Fairy Tail mages, he said, his voice rising above the din the guild members were making. But I can handle it from here. Save your strength for the real battles. He sent out a light pulse of chakra that pushed them away from him. The ones caught off guard fell into the sand in a pile of flailing limbs, yelping. What the hell was that for, En? Natsu yelled as he sat up, spitting sand out of his mouth. I'm so gonna kick your ass later. En tuned him out and took a deep breath, concentrating all his attention on getting rid of the Jupiter blast that threatened to demolish the guild. Secret Shinobi Art, Grand Galaxy Slicer. He thundered, shooting out more threads from his chakra cloak. While his chakra arms compressed and twisted the energy beam, the individual strands weaved around it, shredding the whole beam as if it was nothing more than paper. The small light particles twinkled in the sunlight, giving off the illusion that they were tiny falling stars raining down from the heavens. In a matter of seconds, the Jupiter blast was completely decimated, its remaining fragments vanishing with the wind. And exhaled slowly, straightening back up. His golden chakra cloak faded away, having fulfilled its purpose. There, that was one problem taken care of. He turned around to give Makarov a thumbs up. That was so cool. The Fire Dragon Slayer gushed, breaking everyone out of their momentary funk. I definitely want to fight you when this is over. I'm all fired up now, and chuckled at his enthusiasm. He was about to tell Natsu no when, with an ominously loud crack, his mask split right down the middle. With a sense of doomed finality, a network of spiderweb cracks spread all across the mask, shattering it, and teleported out of sight before anyone could catch a glimpse of his true face. He reappeared on the guild's roof, summoning a spare mask from the seals on his left arm to replace the one that just broke. That was a close call. I could have fooled them with the transformation jutsu, but I think it will be more beneficial at the moment if they don't see my face at all. Judging by the events that are being set into motion, something big is going to happen very soon, he thought, looking at the Phantom Lord Guild in the distance. That Jupiter blast didn't compare to a full-strength tailed beast ball, but it spelled big trouble for the Fairy Tail mages. Something with that much magical power was nothing to sniff at, although gathering enough energy needed to fire a full-power blast would definitely take some time. He'd say 10 minutes at the very least. Considering they had just fired, they would need to recharge its power source. Now would be the best time for Fairy Tail to begin its counterattack. He summoned a clone to inform Makarov to take action while they still had the chance. He'd sit out of the fight for now. Makarov still had the tri-pronged kunai with him, so if they really needed his help, he'd go. But as he had told Natsu before, he was Fairy Tail's guardian, not its babysitter. Those brats could handle things themselves. They didn't need him to hold their hands for them. That wasn't his job. Besides, he had already taken one of Phantom Lord's major players out of action for them. Gajio Red Fox wasn't going to be released from his prison anytime soon, and made himself comfortable on the roof to watch the action unfold. If Phantom Lord decided to fire Jupiter again, he'd be right there waiting for it. Phantom Lord wouldn't lay a single finger on his guild if he had anything to say about it. He had told Mavis that Fairy Tail was in good hands, and it was going to stay that way. The blonde summoned the scroll containing Gajio from the seal on his arm. He wasn't going to let the man go after all his work capturing and interrogating him, but he wondered what would happen if he stuck Gajio back into the game. Even in his current condition, the Iron Dragon Slayer would put up a good fight against Natsu. The Fire Dragon Slayer would toughen up by beating the shit out of his opponent, reaffirming Fairy Tail's strength compared to Phantom Lord's, and form a special camaraderie with him that N could only expect between two Dragon Slayers. On the other hand, if he withheld Gajio from the battle, Phantom Lord would have one less power player on their field, thus tipping the advantage to Fairy Tail's side. Natsu would get to fight a different opponent, kick their ass, and grow stronger that way, but he wouldn't be able to forge the kind of Dragon Slayer kinship bond with Gajio that would come out of two dominant males beating the crap out of each other. Perhaps he could introduce the two of them after the guild war was over. It would be too much to hope for them to get along, but at least they would know that the other existed. N's thoughts were interrupted when a loud, sinister voice echoed in the air around them. I don't know how you destroyed my Jupiter blast, but you Fairy Tail pests have been a thorn in my side for far too long. Give me Lucy Heartfilia or I will launch a stronger Jupiter blast at your pathetic guild. Your petty parlor tricks will not save you this time. N's eyes narrowed. How dare the guild master of Phantom Lord call his beautiful shinobi technique a petty parlor trick? He'd let it slide for now. Insults were like water without any force behind them. But if any of the Fairy Tail members ended up hurt, he'd make sure the asshole regretted ever being born. That was an Uzumaki Naruto grade promise. He resealed the scroll and stood up, and watched as Makarov's hand shot up, his index finger pointing up and his thumb pointing sideways in a distinctly L-like shape. The Fairy Tail members followed suit, roaring their agreement to the high heavens. And wasn't sure what that gesture was supposed to symbolize, but apparently it had been made into a Fairy Tail tradition. He grinned. It was good to see things changing through the years. It would have been boring if Fairy Tail had stayed the same, and decided to dispel his clone after Makarov's announcement. He felt the familiar rush of memories as they poured into his mind, and he carefully reviewed them. After hearing N's urge to take action from his clone, Makarov had carefully selected the strongest 4 mages among the group on the beach to invade the Phantom Lord Guild and destroy the Jupiter Cannon. Makarov would accompany them so he could confront Jose personally. The remaining mages would stay behind to defend the guild and keep Lucy out of Phantom Lord's greedy hands. Should the enemy guild fire another Jupiter blast before they could destroy its power source, Makarov had informed them to just leave the task of destroying it to N, since the Jupiter blast was likely strong enough to injure even someone of Urza's caliber. Urza, that's probably the name of that red-haired girl I shoved out of the way earlier, and thought. He looked down from his vantage point and saw Natsu, Urza, a black-haired boy, a muscular mage, and Makarov grouped together at the edge of the lake. The black-haired boy smacked a fist against his other palm, building up magic in his hands, and released it in one go on the surface of the lake. Ice make, floor. Part of Lake Celiora froze over as the black-haired boy created a pathway of ice all the way to the Phantom Lord Guild. The 5 fairy tale mages, followed by a flying blue cat, headed towards the enemy. Very well, you have chosen to defy me, you fairy flies. In 15 minutes, I shall fire another Jupiter blast and obliterate your precious guild. No third-rate barrier is going to stop me from eliminating you. Jose's voice boomed from the mechanical guild. And twitched at the insult. He was much too old to react to such underhanded jabs, but he couldn't help it when someone insulted his work. That bastard just earned a one-way ticket to hell. And chuckled darkly as he summoned several clones to keep Lucy, Heartfilia, and Fairy Tales safe. He then used chakra to camouflage himself so that he wouldn't be seen as he followed the 5 mages to Phantom Lord. No one insults Uzumaki Naruto's seals and gets away with it. After informing the other mages that he was heading off to confront Jose and that they should destroy the Jupiter cannon themselves, Makarov entered one of the hallways. His power began to manifest in a visible aura around him, enough to crack the floor he walked on. He was pleased to see that none of the Phantom Lord members dared to attack him despite him being the enemy. This would make his trip up much less arduous. He fingered the kunai hidden in his coat. 6 years ago, he had defeated Jose at the regular meeting, but Jose had undoubtedly grown stronger since then. Although Makarov was confident that he could still beat the Phantom Lord Guild Master in a straight-up fight despite his old age, he wouldn't put it past a man to have a dirty trick or two up his sleeve. Should that happen, all he needed to do was to throw the kunai, and N would immediately come to his aid. N was infinitely more terrifying than he was, so if he was cornered to the point where he required N's help, Phantom Lord wouldn't stand a chance. It was time that Jose learned that messing with Fairy Tail was a very bad idea. There was a thunderous noise from below, followed by a brief quake. The Jupiter Lacrima had most likely just been smashed to smithereens, courtesy of his Fairy Tail mages. Makarov ignored the ruckus and continued onward to his destination. With that handled, Phantom Lord was down on their main weapon, but he couldn't let his guard down. Jose might have a couple more things that he hadn't shown yet. Just as that thought passed through his head, the guild began to rumble. Makarov was taken aback as the floor started to tilt upward, making him slide into a nearby pillar. He clung on with all his might, enlarging his hands to make sure he had a firm grip. Whatever he had been expecting from Jose, this certainly wasn't it. Fun stuff, isn't it? N's voice came out of nowhere. Wah, N, is that you? Makarov asked, bewildered. What was N doing here? Wasn't he supposed to be back at the guild? Correct, Makarov-san. N appeared in front of him, somehow managing to stand on the floor, which was nearly vertical at this point. Makarov chalked it up to an ability of N's that he had picked up sometime in his life. N walked forward with steady steps, gently removing Makarov from the pillar. Seems like neither of us expected a development like this, said N, heading up. You're going to where the Phantom Lord Guild Master is, yes? Makarov nodded. But now that this has happened, get outside first. I want to see what's going on, he said. Floors didn't switch orientations without a reason. As you wish. To Makarov's shock, and began to run up the floor, which was more or less a wall by now. Makarov gave up trying to figure it out. The immortal man was as enigmatic as they come. In no time at all, and exited the guild. He set Makarov down. They now stood on top of a small platform close to the top of the enemy guild. Makarov gasped when he realized that Phantom Lord had literally turned into a mechanical giant, and one of its fingers was drawing the magic circle for the forbidden spell Abyss Break. That Jose, suddenly it began to rain. Both N and Makarov looked over the edge to peer at the larger platform below theirs, where Gray was confronting a woman wearing a Russian Cossack hat. She had tightly curled blue hair, and she was wearing a navy blue coat with a fur shawl over her shoulders. They weren't fighting yet, but Makarov guessed that she was probably one of Phantom Lord's elite element 4. His eyes narrowed. Come to think of it, how was Jose powering the giant to write the spell? If Makarov knew the other man, he wouldn't do it himself. Did that mean the element 4 had something to do with it? He decided it would be best to leave his fairy tale mages to deal with it while he challenged Jose. He had faith in the generation that he had raised. Let's go, and Gray can handle himself, Makarov said, turning to head back inside. And nodded and followed after him. They walked down the hallway, Makarov once again displaying his impressive aura of power. The few Phantom Lord members they encountered hurriedly scampered out of the way. No one wanted to mess with Fairy Tail's guild master or the tall, masked man who accompanied him, who oozed strength and confidence from his every pore despite keeping his aura contained. Makarov glanced back at N when the Shadow Guardian suddenly pivoted on his heel and sucker punched a man wearing a green bowler hat and a white blindfold over his eyes, who had appeared out of nowhere behind them. The man flew backwards and went through the wall, leaving behind an enormous hole. A consecutive series of crashes indicated that the mage had also gone through several more walls after that. N straightened and said, "Let's continue. We don't need to waste time on someone who can't even do a proper ambush." That would have caught me off guard, Makarov thought. I didn't even sense him, as if knowing what the guild master was thinking, and spoke. "I have a sharp nose." He might have been able to hide his presence, but not his scent. I could also detect the slight vibrations he sent through the floor with his footsteps. "It's not possible to sneak up on me if you don't have any shinobi training, so you don't have to worry about ambushes when I'm with you." "That's a relief," Makarov replied, grinning. "I don't want Fairy Tail to lose morale if I'm taken down before I defeat Jose. I won't allow that to happen, Makarov-san. Rest assured that Phantom Lord will be going down today," and said. He began to walk forward. "Let's go. I can sense that your mages have all completed their battles and are heading up as well. We'll reconvene in one of the rooms." The guild began to rumble again, some of the walls crumbling into debris, and sent a clone to check on what was going on outside. Makarov surmised that the reason the mechanical guild was shaking was likely because his Fairy Tail mages had defeated the other Element 4, and had knocked the one with the bowler hat through several walls with a single punch, probably rendering him unconscious. If all 4 of Phantom Lord's elite squad of mages had been defeated, they would stop powering the giant robot. Consequently, the Abyss Break spell would disappear, since the giant would no longer be functioning enough to finish drawing it. When N's clone dispelled, he affirmed that Makarov's reasoning was spot on. The mechanical giant had been powered by the Element 4, and with all of them beaten, it had collapsed. The Abyss Break spell had faded. A few rooms later, they stepped into a large chamber that was easily twice the size of some of the previous rooms they had passed through. From a door at the opposite side of the room, 5 victorious Fairy Tail mages emerged. Makarov blinked. "When did Mary Jane join the party, Master?" Urza called out upon seeing them, her face lighting up. "You're all right. Did you beat the Phantom Lord Guild Master already?" Gray asked, walking towards them. Makarov shook his head. "We haven't located him, unfortunately. But with his guild on the verge of collapse and the Element 4 defeated, I'm certain he will come and fight us on his own," he answered. He gestured to his side. "And here will also assist us, N? When did you get here?" Natsu asked, bounding over to them with an excited grin. "Did you follow us?" "I did. That asshole insulted my seals. I'm not going to let him get away with that," N replied miffed. "Although I'm only going to step in if he proves to be too much for you guys." "What? You're not fighting?" Natsu demanded. "Why not? I'm stronger than all of you combined. If I fought for you, none of you would get any valuable battle experience that comes from fighting a strong opponent, because it would be over in less than a minute," N explained. "So I'm going to sit this one out unless he does something drastic, or he gets the upper hand." "Good point," Urza conceded with a small smile. "You're a man among men," Elfman shouted, punching his fist into the air. "We'll definitely show you the power of Fairy Tail. You better watch, N, 'cause I'm going to beat you one day," Natsu declared, pointing his finger at N. "I." Happy chirped from his position on Natsu's head, and chuckled. "I'm sure you will," he replied. The atmosphere in the room abruptly turned serious as a huge amount of malicious intent made itself known at the third doorway to the room, where the Phantom Lord Guild Master entered, slowly clapping. A horrific aura surrounded Jose, so full of hatred and anger and malevolence that it made most of the Fairy Tail wizards in the room feel physically ill. Only N stood unaffected by it. "You disgusting fairies have irritated me for the last time," Jose growled, his hands falling back down to his sides. "I applaud you for taking down my Element 4, but you will go no further. I will crush you all myself. Feel the power of my hatred. Feel my enmity and grovel at my feet, you worthless flies," he cackled maniacally, throwing his arms out wide. Even Makarov was feeling the effects of Jose's animosity. His Fairy Tail mages were struggling to fortify their mental will against Jose's overwhelming aura, but they were ultimately failing. His hostility is too strong, Makarov thought, forcing himself to stay on his feet. How can this be? Mary Jane was shaking, and looked like she was about to hurl. There was a subtle hint of fear in Natsu's eyes at the sheer power that Jose was giving off. Is this the end? Then N did something that none of them expected him to do. He laughed. The malignant atmosphere abruptly vanished, replaced by total bewilderment, as all the Fairy Tail mages and the Phantom Lord Guild Master just stared at the laughing man, utterly baffled as to why N was cracking up in the face of such horrific intent. Had it been too strong for him and he'd gone mental on them? N's laughter finally subsided, although a few extra chuckles still escaped his mouth. You call that enmity? You call that hatred? Oh man, that's just too funny. That wouldn't even register a 1 on my hatred scale. Ha ha. Oh gods, I can't, he choked out, before laughing all over again. Everyone else in the room just sweat dropped. You dare to mock me, you fairy trash? Jose spat, sending a wave of darkness magic towards the Shadow Guardian. What would you know of my anger, of my humiliation? To his astonishment, En just dispersed his dead wave with a casual flick of his wrist. 2 seconds later, the opposite wall was cleaved in half. Jose gaped at the damage. What? How? What did you do? And calmed down again. He looked directly at Jose and enunciated every word loudly and clearly. I don't know where you got the idea that your malicious aura would amount to anything, but it's not going to work on me. I've faced hatred 1,000 times worse than yours will ever be, and I came out fine. You want to know what hatred feels like? Let me give you a taste of my killing intent. His eyes turned blood red. The pressure in the room tripled as En unleashed his own aura, although he made sure to direct it only towards the Phantom Lord Guild Master and not to his own guild members. They would still feel it, but it wouldn't be as powerful. Makarov shivered as En's killing intent washed over him. He tore his gaze away from En to glance at his fairy tale mages, cringing inwardly as he saw the fear written all over their faces. He switched his attention back to Jose. The other guild master looked white as a sheet. His eyes were bulging in their sockets, and he was gasping desperately for air. Sweat was literally pouring down his face, and his hands were shaking so badly that Makarov thought they might fall off. There was a noticeable wet spot on the front of his pants. Jose tipped backwards, his hands shooting up towards his throat. The Phantom Lord Guild Master looked just about ready to strangle himself to death. En's spine-chilling aura vanished, leaving the entire group shaken and shivering in their own clothes. The masked man stood in the center of the room, his red eyes receding back to their usual blue color. Makarov was the first to recover. And I would like to reiterate what I said the first time I met you. You're terrifying, the old guild master remarked, taking deep breaths to get his nerves back under control, and observed the twitching form of the Phantom Lord Guild Master, who had fainted and had foam bubbling from his mouth. I might have gone overboard on this one, he conceded, scratching the back of his head. My bad. I'll wake him up so you guys can have your battle. He might be too traumatized to continue, Makarov replied, sparing Jose a minute glance. It's alright, En. They got their fair share of battle experience already. Well, guess it can't be helped, En said, shrugging. So much for me sitting out on this one. Sorry about that. The fairy tale mages slowly recovered from their shock. It's alright, En, Urza responded after a moment. Her eyes gazed at him warily. You're strong. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, En returned casually. He looked at Natsu, who was still gazing at him with fearful eyes, his pupils dilated. En sighed. He walked over to the pink-haired dragon slayer and crouched down, frowning behind his mask when Natsu made a move to scoot away from him. It was probably his draconic instinct, warning him that En was dangerous and to keep as far away from him as possible. Well, he'd have none of that. Natsu, he intoned sharply, setting a hand on top of Natsu's head. Natsu, look at me. A bit of awareness came back to the fire dragon slayer's eyes. En? He whispered, his pupils shrinking back to a more normal size. What was that? That was something called killing intent. It's a technique of sorts from my homeland where the user expresses his intention to kill to the opponent. It functions as an illusion, more or less, since a particularly strong amount of it can enable the opponent to see their own death, and explained, gently ruffling the boy's pink hair. I'm sorry you had to feel it. But remember this, Natsu, it's alright to know fear. Fear is important. It tells you when you are outclassed, when to back down, and when to admit defeat. It also represents an obstacle you have to overcome. Think of it as your weakness. When you are able to overcome your fear, your weakness will disappear. That makes sense, Natsu murmured, averting his gaze. But I can't seem to get it out of my head. How terrifying you were in that one moment, I mean. It's like he trailed off, looking down at his hands. They still quivered slightly. He clenched them. It's like you weren't there anymore. Like you had disappeared and were replaced by a murderer. The room went quiet at the sound of Natsu's words. En stood up, his hand sliding from Natsu's hair. A murderer, how that's not so surprising, En said softly, sounding slightly sad, and maybe a bit wistful. His next words were so quiet that only Natsu and Makarov could hear them. When you've lived the way I have, killing becomes just another one of those unavoidable things. Natsu gave him a confused look, and shook his head and stepped away. He turned to the twitching Phantom Lord Guild Master and summoned the scroll he had sealed Gajeel in. He released Gajeel from the scroll. The Iron Dragon Slayer landed flat on his back, jerking him awake. Gajeel immediately shot to his feet. You fucker! I'm going to cave your face in for everything you did to me. He roared, throwing his arm forward and morphing it into a steel sword, and caught the sword with one hand, paying no heed to the way the sharp edges dug into his skin. I advise you to take a look around first, Iron Boy. Your guild has lost the war it started, and said. He threw the sword away from him, causing Gajeel to lose his balance and fall on his ass. Fairy Tale is the victor here. Gajeel stole a quick glance around, his eyes landing on his unconscious guild master. Master! You bastard, he seethed, switching his gaze back to En. How dare you do this to our guild? We're supposed to be the strongest. You fairy trash! The Fairy Tale mages glared at Gajeel. Who are you calling trash? Screamed Natsu, leaping to his feet, fists ablaze. Urza, equipped into her Heaven's Wheel armor, looming dangerously over Gajeel with numerous swords pointed at his head. Elfman used takeover magic and transformed into an enormous beast with horns growing out of his head. He cocked a fist back, ready to pummel Gajeel at a moment's notice. Gray spread his feet apart, locking his hands in his usual ice-make stance. They looked ready to kill. Wait! A woman's voice called from the doorway where the fairy tale team had first entered the room. All eyes turned in that direction, landing on a blue-haired woman in a navy blue coat. She shrank back a bit at all the attention, but squared her shoulders and strode forward, coming to a stop in front of Gajeel. She held her arms out, spreading her feet apart in a protective stance. Juvia? What are you doing? You're supposed to fight them. Gajeel growled, getting to his feet. Juvia has already been defeated, Gajeel, Juvia replied, keeping her eyes trained on Makarov. Juvia wants to stop fighting too. Juvia's guild master is down, and though Juvia's body is made of water, even Juvia does not think Juvia could take on all of these fairy tale mages at once. Gajeel looked vexed, but he knew Juvia was correct, especially since N was present. He glowered at them, crossing his arms petulantly and muttering, "TCH, good to see someone with a brain around here," and said, signaling for the fairy tale members to stand down. In return, Juvia lowered her arms and moved to step beside Gajeel. Your name is Juvia, correct? What do you guys plan on doing after this? Juvia looked confused. What do you mean? She asked. The guild war that Phantom Lord instigated has undoubtedly caught the attention of the Magic Council. Once they get all the information they need, they will disband Phantom Lord and strip your guild master of his Wizard Saint title. Without an official guild to return to, do both of you intend to become mercenaries until you can find another guild to join up with? And elaborated. Juvia fidgeted shyly, her eyes flicking in Gray's direction, and smirked under his mask when he saw that. I sense a fangirl crush in the works, he thought, amused. Juvia would like to join Fairy Tale, she murmured, inclining her head. That is, if you don't mind Juvia joining? Juvia! Gajeel exclaimed, shocked. You want to become one of these annoying fairies? What did you say, you bastard? Natsu exploded, firing up again. Why don't you say that to my face, huh? Gajeel rammed his head against Natsu's, his eyes twitching in irritation. Didn't you hear me the first time, trash? Or are your ears just for show, as salamander? He hissed back, grinding his teeth. Why you? And clapped his hands together loudly, interrupting the fight that was starting between the two dragon slayers. Right, let's stop there, you two, he called loudly, breaking the fight up. Natsu, I know you don't like him, but try to get along with your fellow dragon slayer, alright? He laid down a hand on both boys' shoulders. As predicted, Natsu gaped at the smugly grinning brunette. What the hell, you're a dragon slayer too? He blurted out, pointing a finger right at Gajeel's face. Gajeel swatted N's hand off his shoulder and leaned back. That's right, bitch, I'm the Iron Dragon Slayer, Gajeel boasted, sending a cocky smirk in Natsu's direction. Then do you know where Igneel is? Natsu prompted, ignoring Gajeel's smirk. Gajeel scowled. Of course I don't, idiot. Who the hell is Igneel? He asked. My father, the Fire Dragon. Natsu proudly proclaimed. Why the hell would you think I'd know him then, you dumbass? Gajeel retorted, his eye twitching. I'm the Iron Dragon Slayer. The only dragon I know is Metallicana, and the bastard flew off and abandoned me 7 years ago. Fucking piece of shit. Natsu froze. 7 years ago? He whispered, going pale. He stared at Gajeel with a serious expression, then asked, Did your dragon also leave you behind 7 years ago on July 7th, the year X777? Yours too? Gajeel grunted, frowning. That can't be a coincidence. Before they could discuss any more on the mysterious whereabouts of their respective dragons, a wave of darkness magic shot towards them. They leaped apart, everyone's attention going to the now conscious Phantom Lord Guild Master. He was still shaking a bit, after effects from receiving the full brunt of N's killing intent, but he looked more pissed off than a PMSING bitch on a bad day, and that was saying something. Master, Gajeel acknowledged, inclining his head. Jose's face warped into a demonic grin, showing all of his teeth. How nice of you to return Gajeel Red Fox to me, he jeered, pulling himself up to his full height. Gajeel, Juvia, attack those fairy pests. Oh no, you don't. I took him off the playing field and it's going to stay that way, and said, unfurling his scroll. He slipped the light pen out of his pocket and quickly drew a seal in the air. Gajeel's eyes widened. Fuck wow you, he yelled, once again disappearing into the scroll. And rolled it up and resealed it back into the markings on his left arm. There, he said cheerfully to the enraged guild master. Now you can't get to him. Jose's face turned an unpleasant shade of maroon. You disgusting brat. He spat, charging up his darkness magic. He swung his hand in an arc in front of him. Dark pulse, and had already written a seal in the air with his light pen before the area around him and his fellow fairy tale mages exploded. The dome-shaped barrier he had created blocked the explosion from reaching them. You know, I take offense to that insult, and sighed, bringing the index and middle fingers on his left hand together. 'Cause I'm older than you know. You should respect your elders, you impudent child. Burst, the dome-shaped barrier blasted outward, creating a shockwave of air that knocked Jose clean off his feet. And leaped into the air, his golden chakra cloak once again enveloping his body. 2 arms sprung out of his cloak and grabbed onto the Phantom Lord Guildmaster, who looked fearful upon remembering that N was the one who had unleashed the terrifying killing intent on him earlier. N held up a single index finger, a small, compact blue sphere with 4 razor-sharp edges spinning around it forming at the tip. Mini raisin shuriken, he said, flicking the sphere towards Jose. The Guildmaster struggled to move out of the way, but N's chakra arms held him firmly in place. Jose screamed as the attack impacted, a whirlwind of tiny, invisible chakra blades shredding and slicing through flesh and bone. Gasping for breath, he fell to his knees, one hand pressed against his abdomen. Blood poured out of the wound, showing no signs of stopping. And watched him struggle with unsympathetic eyes. "Hey, N! Stop hogging all the fun to yourself!" Natsu hollered, breaking N out of his bloodthirsty mindset. The masked shinobi silently cursed at himself. He thought he'd finally broken out of his bloodlust phase, but it seemed like it was starting to return to him. He needed to get the hell out of here before it got worse, and Makarov murmured, giving him a look heavily laced with disapproval. "My apologies, Makarov-san. I let my dark side get the best of me," and said, bowing his head. "Unfortunately, my skills in healing are rudimentary at best, and are unsuited for use on mages. The most I can do is first aid." Makarov solemnly observed the other guildmaster, who shakily stood back up despite the hole in his abdomen. "I'm not finished yet," Jose growled, his eyes going bloodshot with delirium. "Phantom Lord will never bow down to fairy tale. Now die." He shot a destructive wave of magic towards them, which cracked the floor as it passed over it. Everyone dodged the dead wave easily. "Give it up, Jose," Makarov said, a somber expression gracing his aged face. "You've lost already?" The elderly guild master stepped towards the younger wizard saint. He didn't like Jose or the fact that the Phantom Lord guild master had tried to annihilate his guild, but the other man was a fellow wizard saint and human being. Fairy Tail also had a strict no-killing policy, although N had just toed the line with his last attack. He'd have to talk to the Shadow Guardian about that later. Jose gritted his teeth. "You think I'm a fool, Makarov?" he snarled, raising his arm again. "Phantom Lord is number 1. Juvia! Finish them off." He pointed at the Fairy Tail mages. Juvia looked calm as she stepped towards her guild master. "Master, Juvia means no disrespect, but Juvia quits," she announced loudly, erasing her Phantom Lord guild mark. Jose's eyes bulged sickeningly. "You bitch. Are you siding with Fairy Tail now? Then you can die too," he yelled, spit flying from his mouth. Dark Pulse. The attack simply passed through Juvia, since her body was made of water. Behind her, Gray moved into position. "Ice make, shield," he said, throwing his arms up. A thick shield of ice rose up before them, blocking Jose's attack from reaching the Fairy Tail mages. Urza surged forward. "Blumenblatt," she called out, slashing at Jose with her swords. Despite being heavily injured, Jose's ingrained reflexes allowed him to dodge the majority of Urza's strikes. His blood painted the stone tiles a bright, crimson color. "We will not allow you to harm Fairy Tail anymore, you snake." Natsu was next. "Fire Dragon's Roar." He breathed out a hot stream of flames from his mouth. Jose moved to the side and countered by sending small bursts of darkness magic at Natsu. The magic bullets forced Natsu to end his attack so he could dodge them. "Fairy Tail is the strongest," he shouted, flames blazing around his fist. "And you aren't going to take that away from us, you bastard." Gray dispelled his shield and concentrated his magic in his hands. "Ice make, lance." Several spears of ice shot towards the Phantom Lord guild master. Jose destroyed them with his dead wave, but then he got clocked in the face by Natsu's Fire Dragon's Iron Fist attack. He flew backwards and hit the wall with a resounding crack. He slid down, letting out a wet gasp. No, I can't lose, this is impossible," Jose gurgled, trying to get back up. "I can't lose not to Fairy Tail." Elfman also prepared to launch his Beast Soul Fist at Jose, but Makarov held out a hand. "That's enough. He's already been defeated," the elderly guild master commanded. To continue would be nothing more than bullying at this point. Elfman reluctantly lowered his arm. He dispelled his takeover magic, allowing himself to revert back to his human form. Urza equipped into her usual Heart Crew's armor, and both Natsu and Gray extinguished their magic. Together with Mary Jane and Makarov, they stood tall in front of Jose. "You've lost, Jose. And if you dare to come after us again, we will not show mercy. You had the power and strength to secure a position as a wizard saint despite your relatively young age, yet you wandered down the wrong path and squandered your potential. If you had chosen to use your power for good, you would have been a good role model to the younger generation," Makarov said gravely. "Fairy Tail will trump your guild no matter what you do, because we are a guild that encourages bonds between comrades. We will never betray one another. If you attack us, you will incur our wrath. If you hurt us, we will pay you back threefold. We are the strongest guild, and we will continue to outshine you." "Why?" "Because we are Fairy Tail." The last two words were echoed by all of the Fairy Tail wizards, resulting in a loud and proud declaration that reverberated throughout the room. "My guild was supposed to be the strongest." Jose wheezed, his bloodshot eyes glaring at the line of mages standing together in front of him. Damn you all! Damn you all to hell! I will never bow down to you, and stepped forward. Please allow me to finish this, he said, summoning an empty scroll from his seals. He wrote a seal in the air and activated it. Jose instantly disappeared into the scroll before he could say anything else, leaving behind nothing but a bloody smear on the wall. And resealed the scroll and gave Makarov a thumbs up. The guild war between Phantom Lord and Fairy Tail was now officially over. Upon realizing this, the Fairy Tail mages burst into cheers. Makarov and N walked a little distance away, watching the scene fondly. Even Juvia was dragged into celebrating with them, although she protested at first because she had been one of their former enemies. Who cares? You want to join Fairy Tail? That makes you one of us, Natsu announced, punching a flaming fist into the air. That's right, Gray added, holding out a hand to her. So come on. Juvia looked at both of them in wonder and flushed pink. Thank you, she said, taking Gray's hand. Juvia will do her best. Natsu grinned boyishly at her, his eyes slipping closed. What do you think, Mavis-chan? N thought, smiling softly behind his mask. This is the fairy tale you've always dreamed of, one that is bright and warm, yet strong, and values family and friendship above all else. And I would like to ask something of you, Makarov began in a low voice, tearing his eyes away from the scene to look up at the masked shinobi. Yes? What is it, Makarov-san? Makarov took a deep breath. Would you consider giving up your shadow guardianship to become a full-fledged member of Fairy Tail? He asked, clasping his hands behind his back. Ha! You want to terminate the shadow guardianship contract, Makarov-san? N asked, sounding surprised. Makarov could see a glimpse of shadowed blue through the eye holes in N's mask. The aged guildmaster nodded. Your alias has become known to most of the Fairy Tail wizards by now, N. I think they will feel better if you could show them your face, too, Makarov explained. The man named Mystigan doesn't show his face, N pointed out. Mystigan is a different story. There's a good reason why he doesn't reveal his face. You only keep your face hidden because it is requirement of the shadow guardianship contract. But if the contract is dissolved, you won't have to hide anymore, N. Makarov said, and sighed, crossing his arms over his chest. You know, if I hadn't been there, your guild would be a pincushion right now, he replied, glancing back to the rowdy guild members. Urza was currently prying Natsu and Gray apart and reprimanding them for fighting. That's nothing, we would have just rebuilt it. The guild isn't comprised of just the building, you know. It's the mages in it who make it up, Makarov countered. We were planning to expand it anyway. Hey, you sound like Mavis, and chuckled, slapping a hand over his mask. He was quiet for a moment. Are you sure you want me in the guild, Makarov-san? I'm not even a mage, I'm a shinobi. Makarov waved a hand around casually. Don't sweat the small stuff. If you're part of Fairy Tail, you're part of our family, mage or not, he said, pushing N to accept his consideration. Fairy Tail will become your new family, you'll see. Mavis' words echoed in his head, despite being said nearly 100 years ago. N smiled. You got me, Makarov-san. Very well, I will consider it. But I think we best be heading back now. The rest of the guild is probably anxious for our triumphant return, the masked shinobi replied, turning to walk towards the door. Come on, you rowdy lot, we need to tell the other guild members that we won. Yeah! Natsu cheered, bounding after N. Happy chirped, flying beside him. In high spirits after defeating their enemy, the group climbed to the highest part of the mechanical giant, which had collapsed after the Element Four were defeated. Looking down, the other Fairy Tail members still standing on the beach looked like tiny, colorful ants. They crowded together on the ground, looking up expectantly at the members who had infiltrated the guild. Everyone, get ready! Makarov instructed, standing in the center. The other Fairy Tail members arranged themselves on either side of him, while N stood behind him. Juvia hung back since she wasn't an official member yet, but Natsu grabbed her hand and pulled her to stand beside them. Juvia smiled at being included, even though she didn't know what they were preparing to do. They all took a deep breath. We are Fairy Tail! The Fairy Tail mages bellowed together, shooting their hands into the air to form an L shape with their thumbs and index fingers. Juvia followed suit once she saw what they were doing. Upon seeing the sign and hearing the united cry, raucous cheering rose up from the members on the beach. Fairy Tail had won. Chapter 4, Decisions. Year X784. In the comfort of his hidden alcove, and sat on his bed, holding his spare mask face up in his hands. The bright glow from his desk lamp cast an odd shadow over the mask, giving it a more sinister appearance. The cadmium orange lines almost looked like threads of flame, weaving in, out, and around the ebony black surface, and stared at it contemplatively. The tip of his index finger brushed over the edge of the left eye hole. For 98 years, he had carried the mantle of shadow guardianship. 98 years of wearing masks, 98 years of hiding his name and face, 98 years of being N and disassociating himself from his identity as Uzumaki Naruto. Makarov wanted to terminate the shadow guardianship contract so that N could be made into an official member of Fairy Tail. If he agreed, he would no longer belong to the darkness of the shadows and the dirty, bloody battleground formed by the dregs of society. He would be stepping into the light, where mercy and decency went hand in hand, and he would be exposed to the world once again. Every fiber of his being protested against it. Shinobi thrived in the shadows, no matter their age, strength, or reputation. It was their way of life. And exhaled softly, closing his eyes. Of course, the shinobi had died out a long time ago. War after war had seen to it, staining the air with the smell of ashes, blood, and smoke, the sky glowing crimson with fire. The screams echoed, the monuments warped beyond recognition, and the dead rotted in the streets. The vegetation withered with time, turning what was once a beautiful landscape to dust and blood-stained soil. 150 years after he was born, all but him had perished, and the age of mages began. Forget the naivety of his youth. The peace his revered teacher had talked about was nothing but wishful thinking. That dream had died with his friends, and opened his eyes, gazing down at the mask again. He set it aside and stood up, stepping towards his desk to pull out one of the drawers. A small silver mirror rested inside. He picked it up and peered stoically at his reflection. Nothing had changed since the last time he had glanced into the mirror. He still looked like he was 25. But if one looked closely enough, his eyes appeared tired and pained, swimming with the depths of years far beyond his physical age. How could Makarov expect him to expose himself like this? And paused at the thought, blinking at the mirror. Since when did he care what others thought of him? Had he become so deeply entrenched into his role as N that his fundamental self had changed, adapting to fairy's tale ideals and Mavis will? 98 years was not a particularly long time when one considered the extent of his lifespan, but it was long enough for a person to change, and put the mirror away. He picked up his mask and secured it over his face, feeling an odd sense of relief as its familiar weight settled over his skin. He was, first and foremost, a shinobi. And once a shinobi, he reached out to switch off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Always a shinobi. He felt the tug of the Haration. Makarov must have thrown the kunai. They had just defeated Phantom Lord, so he doubted it was an emergency. It was highly likely that the guild master just wanted to finish their conversation about his shadow guardianship status, and teleported to the location of the kunai. But instead of Makarov's office, he found himself in the center of the guild hall, surrounded by all of the members of Fairy Tail. Makarov stood on top of the table next to him, his arms still in its throwing position. The aforementioned kunai was stuck into the floor at N's feet. And bent down to retrieve the kunai, twirling it around his index finger by the ring at the end of its handle. Makarov-san, he began, his voice deceptively calm, what is the meaning of this? He tossed the kunai into the air, snatched it by its handle, and slammed it point first into the table. Didn't I tell you that this was for emergencies only? His steely gaze pierced straight through the old guild master, making Makarov sweat a bit at its intensity. The wizard saint straightened back up, clearing his throat. The fairy tale mages watched the two of them in tense silence, and Makarov started, clasping his hands behind his back. Fairy Tail would like to thank you for your services. You protected the guild admirably, as expected of your shadow guardianship duties. With Phantom Lord defeated and all its members now in the council's custody, it is time to turn our attention to the matter we talked about directly after your capture of Jose. Have you made a decision yet? He finished his mini-speech off with a hopeful grin, and was silent. He flicked his gaze over the fairy tale members standing behind Makarov, noting their grateful, but curious faces. He could see the questions in their eyes. Who is this guy? Is he a new fairy tale member? I've never seen him before, so do you think he's like Mystigan? What's his name? What do you think he looks like underneath the mask? And so on, so forth. Those kinds of things were to be expected, seeing as he'd kept out of the spotlight for almost a century. His attention returned to Makarov, who looked at him expectantly. No, and answered bluntly. He let go of the kunai, leaving it stuck in the table. I did say I would consider it, Makarov-san, but not now. Not yet. He brought his fingers together in front of him, forming a one-handed seal. If you want to discuss this issue further, your office is more than sufficient, and was interrupted when Natsu lunged at him, a single hand shooting out with the intention of knocking N's mask off his face. And swung his arm up, hitting Natsu off course with a fist to the face. The dragon slayer went flying into the wall. He smacked into it with enough force to leave a hole in the shape of his figure. He stayed there for a few seconds, seemingly frozen with his soul floating out of his mouth, before he fell out of the hole and landed on the floor in a heap. That won't work, Firecracker, and said, lowering his arm. Try again next time. Natsu cried happy, flying over to his downed partner. Are you okay? And watched passively as the pink-haired boy struggled to get to his feet, his limbs still shaking from the force of the blow. Yuri so strong, and Natsu said, steadying himself against the wall. He took a step forward, swaying a little bit. A blonde girl with a ponytail at the side of her head hurried forward to support him, muttering something about how he shouldn't push himself. Why don't you want to join us, huh? Are you scared? Natsu, don't be so rude, the girl scolded, but Natsu ignored her and gazed at N, fiery determination simmering in his eyes. Cheeky brat, N thought, smiling a little behind his mask. Kinda reminds me of myself when I was younger. Heh, think what you want, Natsu. But my reasons are not so shallow that they can be expressed with mere words like scared, the shinobi answered, resuming his one-handed pose. Now if you'll excuse me, hold it. Don't leave yet, I've got something to say to you, said another fairy tale mage, stepping forward. She was the chocolate-haired woman who had attacked him after he'd taken care of Gajeel, and wasn't sure what she could possibly want with him, but he acquiesced by staying where he was instead of teleporting back to Makarov's office. Yes? He prompted when she stood there in silence for a few seconds. Don't rush me, I'm trying to find the right words to say, the woman grumbled, putting a hand on her hip. And right? I just want to thank you for saving the guild, and I'm sorry for accusing you of being an enemy. A hint of pink dusted her cheeks. No problem. I was simply doing my duties as Fairy Tale's shadow guardian, and replied. He looked at Makarov again. Now let us. You're not getting away so easily, N. Yeah, we're gonna tear that stupid mask right off your face. Before N could get in another word edgewise, the Fairy Tale mages converged on him, using the classic capture move universally known as the dog pile, and instantly teleported away, reappearing in Makarov's office. He could still hear the yelps and shouts from outside the door as the wizards fell on top of each other. He chuckled lightly. There was no way they could get him with a predictable move like that, and melted into the shadows in the room, deciding to wait for Makarov to come back to his office before they picked up their discussion. It was heartwarming to know that they wanted him to join their pseudo-family, but he honestly had his reasons for keeping out of the spotlight. Perhaps he and Makarov could tweak the contract somehow so that, rather than a shadow guardian, he could exist as just a protector. He would still be duty-bound to place Fairy Tale's well-being above all else, but he would no longer work solely from the shadows. It was a rather distressing thought. The shadows had been his domain for several centuries. Could he give that world up so easily? He would need more time before he officially made a decision. Perhaps it was time to visit Mavis again, as well as that place. Tenrajima was exactly the same as he remembered it. Bright, lush vegetation in shades of yellow and green dotting the rocky slopes, an enormous tree sitting at its center with its roots entwined, miniature waterfalls spilling over the gaps between the jutting cliffs, and sped up, flapping his golden-orange chakra wings to boost himself higher into the air. He could feel the hot sun beating against his back, courtesy of the island's year-round summer weather. While it was indeed quite warm even for him, it was far from the hottest temperature he had ever experienced. The former Sunagaker of the elemental nations and dragon fire took the top spots for that. A couple minutes later, he landed on the beach, his chakra wings dissipating. He stretched, feeling his spine crack. It was a long way to Tenrajima from the mainland. Although he possessed a monstrous amount of chakra, maintaining his chakra wings for such an extended period of time did take its toll. He would have to rest for at least 2 hours before he had enough energy to fly to his next destination. He took a step forward. Naruto, and immediately used chakra to stick to the sand as a flying blur tackled him from out of nowhere. Long, wavy, flaxen tresses trailed behind the body of the petite girl, who had her ethereal arms firmly wrapped around his torso. 2 wing-like adornments protruded from the sides of her head, complementing the frilly pink robe she wore and giving her an almost fairy-like appearance. She squeezed him tightly. When she looked up, she gave him a bright, happy grin, her green eyes sparkling with childish joy. Hello, little lady. Did you miss me? He teased, patting her on the head. Mavis pouted, but continued to cling to him. You haven't visited me in a long time, that's why, she replied, resting her head against his bare abdomen. I visited you almost a year ago, and told her. That's too long, she complained, and laughed. Sorry, I don't have enough time to visit you more often, he said, removing the mask from his face and storing it in his seals. What have you been up to since I last came here? Mavis sighed and released him. Nothing, like usual. It's boring here 'cause I'm dead, she murmured, digging her toes into the sand. I wish you could stay with me, but I know you're duty-bound to protect Fairy Tale. How is it, by the way? Is Makarov still the guild master? He is, Anne replied, watching the waves wash up on the shore, the edge of the water just barely reaching Mavis' feet. That's not what I came to talk about, though. Mavis stopped shifting the sand between her toes and looked at him curiously. You want to talk about something with me? She asked, bouncing away from the waves and towards the forest. Let's go to my grave, then. We can talk all we want. She disappeared into one of the caves, her wavy hair fluttering behind her. Slow down, little lady, or you might hurt yourself, and called jokingly into the mouth of the cave. He followed after the first Fairy Tale guild master at a leisurely pace. Mavis spun around and stuck her tongue out. I'm a spirit, and how can I hurt myself? She asked, twirling around with her arms out. Even if I can physically manifest my body for a while, I'll be fine. Oof, and burst out laughing as Mavis tenderly rubbed her nose, having tripped over a stray pebble and fallen to the ground face first. She sent him an annoyed look. And that wasn't funny. You should have warned me, she whined, striding up to him to smack him on the arm. Her cheeks puffed out, giving her the appearance of a particularly bushy house cat. With a hint of red tinting her nose, it wasn't hard to imagine her as one, and lost it. His howls of laughter echoed off the cavern walls even as he crumbled to the cold stone floor, vigorously beating his fist against it. Mavis stamped her foot against the ground. Hey, stop laughing at me. N. She pouted. She briskly floated over to him and unceremoniously shoved his head down. To her disappointment, and vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving a large rock in his place. It clattered to the ground and bounced off to the side. N himself reappeared a few yards away. Mavis crossed her arms petulantly. The shinobi finally regained control over himself. "You never cease to amuse me, little lady," he chuckled, his blue eyes dancing with mirth. He got back to his feet, walking back over to her so he could pat her on the head. Mavis glowered half-heartedly at him, but didn't move to swat his hand away. They headed in the direction of the grave once N was done. Mavis merrily skipped over the roots and stones, this time making sure she didn't trip over any of them. And ambled along after her, his feet automatically following a path that he had already taken many times. They emerged into an open clearing, sunlight streaming in from above and giving the place a healthy glow. The ground was illuminated in opaque turquoise blue, patches of iridescent green shining faintly here and there. Roots extended out of the mouth of the cave, snaking across the ground. At the far end was an opening partially hidden beneath a hollow knob of long, golden grass. Inside laid a square platform topped by 3 long stones, the central tombstone split down the middle with a circle cut out of it. This was the grave of the famous first guild master of fairy tale, Mavis Vermilion. Mavis spun around halfway to the grave. "So? What did you want to talk about, N?" she asked, clasping her hands behind her back and rocking back on her heels, and made himself comfortable among the thickest roots near the cave's opening. "Do you remember when we first set up the contract for my shadow guardianship?" he inquired, throwing an arm carelessly over the root jutting out at his side. When Mavis nodded, he continued, "Makarov-san wants to terminate it." "Huh? Why?" Mavis gave him a confused look. "He wants me to stop working in the shadows and become an official fairy tale member," and replied. He absently ran a hand through his hair, messing up the untidy spikes even more. "I get his reasoning, but I'd actually rather not come into the light, you know? I can't get rid of centuries of shadow association just like that." Mavis observed him quietly. "This is unusual for you, Naruto. You don't usually dilly-dally about an issue. Do you perhaps, at least in your heart, want to join them?" "Staying in the shadows for so long must be tiring," she said, walking over to him and seating herself next to him. "But it's part of who I am. I'm a shinobi, Mavis, a ninja. I feel like if I step out there onto the public stage, where everyone knows my name and my face, I'll lose something of myself. Especially if I'm officially inducted into fairy tale, I'll have to force myself to adhere to its no-killing policy, which is something my instincts may not allow me to do," and said, frustration seeping into his tone. He rested the back of his head against the thick root, gazing up at the green leaves swaying softly in the wind high above their heads. Guardian or not, killer instincts weren't something to be taken lightly. What could he do though? The idea of remaining fairy tale's protector while ridding himself of the shadow part of the contract still had merit, but a small hand lightly touching his arm jolted him from his thoughts. He nearly whipped out a kunai, but the realization that the hand could only belong to Mavis made his instincts back down. And took deep breaths, inhaling, exhaling, as he closed his eyes. 934 years old was way too old to let his natural instincts get the better of him. He knew that. He was probably overthinking this whole business. N's eyes shot open as 2 tiny hands clapped themselves onto his cheeks and forced his head to turn towards the spirit, his haunted blue eyes meeting concerned green. "Naruto," Mavis began slowly, "I think you're wasting too much time wallowing in the past." The blonde man blinked at her, surprised. "In the past?" he echoed. Mavis nodded, all traces of playfulness melting from her expression. "Exactly. You're old, Naruto, we both know that. But I think it's time for you to let go of whatever inhibitions you have about what you've done in previous years so you can look forward to tomorrow. The shadows may be your past, but maybe it's the stage that holds your future," she told him, carefully studying his face. "Think about it, Naruto. You're fairy tale's protector, but that doesn't mean you have to be a shadow guardian. You can be its shield and its sword without needing to bind yourself to the darkness." She let go of his face, leaning back against the roots. One of her hands remained on his arm, and was quiet, switching his gaze down to his own hands. It was difficult to look forward to the future since he didn't think he had much of one, considering his immortality. But if he could take charge of his own path again, thinking of the day where he would finally die, he could shape his own future. Mavis was right, in a way, and she seemed to have caught on to his train of thought, but that didn't make things any easier. He clenched his fists. "You don't have to reveal your face, you know," Mavis added, seeing the conflicting emotions chase each other across the man's face. "You could keep wearing the mask and continue being N instead of Naruto." "That's true," N conceded. "After all, aside from myself, everyone who knows my true name is dead. Including you. It's your choice in the end, though," Mavis chimed, smiling softly. "I think you should go with the decision that makes the most sense to you." She scooted closer to his side and hugged his arm, a peaceful grin blooming on her youthful face. "Now, come on, look alive. No more of that gloomy face, okay? Let's talk about something else," and smiled sheepishly. "You're right. I didn't come here to bog you down with my boring adult talk," he joked, lifting a finger to poke her in the cheek. She giggled at the touch, but then leveled a flat look in his direction. "You didn't just imply that I'm a kid, right? I'm not as old as you, but I am over 100, you know? she said, a cute little scowl curling her lips. But it's so much fun to tease you, little lady, and laughed. She huffed at him and slapped his arm. Then she got to her feet and danced her way to the center of the clearing. Come on, En, it's such a nice day. Play with me, she called out. Or we could talk too. You're not leaving yet, are you? She brushed a few stray strands of hair over her shoulder and stood up, stretching out the kinks in his back. Might as well stay a while before I head to my next destination, he agreed amicably, his arms dropping back down to his sides. But there's not that much to talk about, given that in the years we've known each other, we've probably discussed every subject under the sun. Just tell me what's happened since the last time you visited me, Mavis pointed out, twirling around once. Her extremely long hair fanned out as she spun, catching the light and making the wavy tresses glow with an ethereal light. Unless it's been another boring year with no incidents, she added, coming to a stop. Something did happen, actually, Anne replied, walking closer to her. A guild called Phantom Lord decided that attacking Fairy Tail was a good idea. You kicked their butts, right? Please tell me you did, Mavis said, a ferocious fire brewing in her narrowed eyes at the thought of her precious guild being attacked, and chuckled, setting one hand on top of her head. Of course. No one will get away with attacking Fairy Tail while I'm around, he cut off as a rush of memories flooded his mind, indicating that one of the clones he'd left to defend the guild had dispelled itself. He snorted out loud as he went over the memories. Mavis looked him curiously. What happened? She asked, removing his hand from her head. One of the council's toadies approached Makarov-san and asked to speak to me. Said that since the Phantom Lord Guild Master was stripped of his title of Wizard Saint, they needed to fill the spot. I don't know how they caught wind of my existence, but my clone gave them a very appropriate answer, and explained, a shark-like smirk surfacing across his face. I get the feeling that you didn't say yes, Mavis laughed. You think? No way in hell am I letting some corrupt government officials dig their claws into me. Let someone else be the council's lapdog, and said, flapping his hand about in a careless motion. Besides, people always seem to overlook the fact that I'm not a mage in the first place. TSK, TSK. He settled his hand on his hip, shaking his head in a mock shameful motion. That's because you don't tell them, silly, Mavis chirped, beaming up at him. Being one of the 10 Wizard Saints is supposed to be an honor, you know. I don't give a flying fuck. Mavis' tinkling laugh rang through the clearing at his blatant response. And grinned, flopping onto his back in one of the shady areas. He laced his fingers together behind his head and closed his eyes. It was nice here. A nap sounded excellent at the moment. Oh, come on, En. You didn't come all this way just to sleep, did you? Mavis spoke close to his ear. Nah, but the conditions are perfect for napping in, he replied. He deliberately let out a loud snore, and he heard Mavis sigh in exasperation. He opened a single eye, grinning mischievously up at her. She just shook her head, a small smile blossoming over her lips, and sat down next to him. Both of them gazed up at the sky together, peering far beyond the green canopy that shaded the clearing. It was a beautiful afternoon, and touched down in the ruins of a house, his chakra wings vanishing into the air. The charred bricks crumbled beneath his feet, staining his sandals with black dust. He looked around, a solemn expression overtaking his face as he was once again confronted with the silent grave of his former village, Konoha. The air no longer smelt of death and ashes, but the broken buildings, the blackened ground, and the ghostly image of a village long gone said everything that didn't need to be said out loud. Time had taken its toll. The great forest that had once sheltered Konoha had taken over the deserted area, covering what remained with vines and saplings. Long grasses sprouted through the cracks of dead buildings, shimmering gently in the light of the setting sun, and tread lightly over the dusty road, his feet tracing a familiar path through the former village. His eyes wandered over its last remnants, taking in the abandoned sites, reminding himself that the era of shinobi had ended centuries ago and left nothing but ancient history in its wake. He paused in front of a particular spot within the village, kneeling down to brush the dust away from the 2 cracked ramen bowls sitting in the dirt. The banner he had planted there before he had officially left the elemental nations was gone, likely the work of wind or rodents. An's fingers touched the single stone slab that jutted out from the ground. Hello, Tuchi-san, I am Nichin. I'm sorry I haven't visited in such a long time. It's been about 400 years, hasn't it? He said softly, tracing over the 2 names carefully etched onto the stone slab. He smiled sadly. The owner of the Ichiraka ramen stand and his daughter had died during the invasion of Konoha when En had been only 35 years old. He still remembered how crushed he had been when he had found out. The invasion hadn't lasted much longer after that. He'd gone into a berserk rage and just killed every enemy ninja he had come across. His eyes darkened. Those were some of the blackest moments in his life. He stood up, wiping the dirt from his fingers. I hope both of you are living happy lives now. Who knows, maybe you're both still ramen chefs, he murmured, turning around. I'm still trying to find something to live for myself. It's taking time, but I think the guild I've become the guardian for is slowly becoming a reason. Its first guild master, Mavis, is a very good friend of mine. On her deathbed, she told me she loved me. I'm not sure if I return those feelings yet, especially since, well, you know who. She's still around as a ghost and I visit her every year though. And you know what she told me? She said she thought I was clinging to my past too much, and she's right. So it's time for me to finally move on. Not to say that I'd forget you guys, I mean, you were both such important people to me. But maybe I can finally forget the ghosts that have haunted me since the elemental nations died. Don't you think so? And got no answer, but he'd expected that. He glanced back once at the old ramen bowls, offering a small, nostalgic smile. Until next time, then, Tucci-san, I am Michin. He continued down the dusty path, a different destination in mind. Minutes later, he came to a large crater at the outskirts of the ruins, where the old training grounds had been located. The crater had been overrun by grass and budding flowers, covering the rocky surface with vegetation. At the center of the hole sat an enormous stone pillar about 4 times taller than N, surrounded by 4 smaller tombstones. The central pillar held the names of all of his important Konoha people who had died in the line of duty. Similarly, the other 4 stones had the names of his non-Konoha friends from their respective villages carved into them. The previous memorial stone had been destroyed during one of the wars, so he had taken it upon himself to create a second memorial site to honor the dead. All 5 stones had vines creeping over them, a testament to the amount of time that had passed since the elemental nations had perished, and the rise of mages had begun, and slowly made his way to the bottom of the crater, placing one palm flat against the cool surface of the stone pillar. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the cold surface, and whispered, "I'm home." A strong gust swept through the area, ruffling N's messy strands of hair. When he stepped away, he could almost imagine they were still with him, and he smiled up at the sky. He took a deep breath. "Hey guys, it's me, Naruto. I know, it's been so long and I'm so sorry for leaving all of you out here without a word, but well, duty calls. Last time was about 400 years ago, wasn't it? The dragons I told you about have been defeated or gone into hiding. Up until 7 years ago, I thought they'd all died, but there was this kid I ran into who assured me that he had been raised by one. His name's Natsu, and he's rude, foul-mouthed, hot-headed, and stupid. Sounds familiar, right? But I definitely think he has the potential to become one of the best mages in Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail is a guild that I became a shadow guardian for 98 years ago. The current guild master is trying to persuade me to drop the contract so I can become a full-fledged member, but I think both mine and Mavis' final decision is better. Rather than a shadow guardian, I'll simply be a guardian, that way I'll be known, but I'll still be able to protect the guild as more than just one of its many members. Anyways, I still haven't found the key to undoing my immortality yet. It's really frustrating, knowing that all of you have probably moved on already. I want to join you guys on the other side, but I can't yet. I hope you're all doing well. I can still imagine Ero-sennin being reincarnated as a porn author again. I do have respect for literature, by the way. I've read every single Ika book you've published, and pervy Kakashi-sensei being some kind of lecherous playboy who makes moves on innocent young ladies. Haha, I'm just kidding, sensei. Tsunade-bachan's probably still the worst gambler ever, knowing her luck. Iruka-sensei, I'm sure you would be a kind and caring teacher no matter where you go. Sakura would be a beautiful doctor, and Sasuke, you're probably out there brooding about something a lot less intense than how to kill particular people. Gaara, I can totally see you as a doting parent in another lifetime despite how you, or rather, both of us, grew up. Thinking about all of this makes me really long for my life to end soon, but hoping for that is just a step away from suicide. Not that I could kill myself, but that's beside the point. That's all. There's not much to say about what I've been doing these last few centuries. The biggest reason I came back is because I feel like something big is going to happen soon, and I'll need the tailed beast's help again. Maybe this time we'll finally kill Acnologia, the damn sneaky bastard that he is, and pause to press a hand to the stone pillar again. Until next time, then. I promise it won't be another 400 years before I visit you guys again. He bumped his fist lightly against the stone. See you later. He turned around to make his way out of the crater. Once he set foot on the outer rim of the crater, he created his chakra wings again. Lifting himself into the air and riding the currents, he veered northwest. He had one last stop to make before he could return to Magnolia, and flew high over the massive treetops, a single flap of his wings shaking leaves loose from their branches. His final destination was somewhere in Earth Country, far away from the former village of Iwagakure. On foot, it would take several days to reach it. With wings, it would be a matter of hours. He should probably rest more, especially since it hadn't been too long since he flew to Konoha all the way from Tenrajima. But he wanted to get back to the guild before anything too big for his clones alone to handle happened. As he sped over the landscape, his eyes took in the scenery, which once again thrived with lush, healthy vegetation. Sites that he remembered being completely burnt to the ground had grass and trees growing on them. The battle graves of shinobi were marked by weapons that still stuck out of the ground, although they were dull, rusty, and had vines crawling all over them. When he reached the edge of Konoha's forest, the wide, flat land of the rest of Fire Country met his eyes. He surged on. When a ring of pillars finally appeared on the horizon and was feeling a noticeable strain on his chakra reserves from using his chakra wings for such a long time, he banked sharply to the left, landing on a rocky outcropping that stuck out of the earth like a giant finger. The golden-orange appendages vanished from his back at last, leaving him to stare into the darkness. That wasn't a problem, he had excellent night vision. He set off towards the pillars. The clouds in the sky parted on his way there, shining moonlight down on the path. En stepped onto the circular platform that the ring of pillars surrounded. He walked over to the one holding a glowing, sand-yellow orb. He touched it and said Shikaka. Next was an ultramarine orb. Matatabi, 3rd sea green. Isabu, 4th, vermilion red. Son Goku, 5th, a brilliant titanium white. Kaku, 6th, a blue so pale it looked almost white. Saiken, 7th, a multicolored orb. Chomei, 8th, an earthy, pastel maroon. Gyuki, and finally, a fiery, blazing orange. Kurama, and walked to the center of the platform. He spread his arms out, speaking only a single word, awaken. The earth trembled, 9 different pillars of light bursting upward from the orbs, making the sky shine rainbow. A strong wind picked up, making En's cloak flap wildly behind him. The circular platform began to glow a bright turquoise blue, small rocks floating off the ground as power began to suffuse through the very air. The lights began to solidify around him, revealing the shrunken forms of the 9-tailed beasts, and lowered his arms, the small pebbles and bits of rock dropping back to the earth. They stood in silence, gazing at each other again after 400 years of separation. Then En's face split into a foxy grin. It's show time. What if Naruto, the true founder of fairy tale? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.